So y'all heard this meeting is being recorded. So we're gonna record this for Nathaniel and then also for Carissa. I wanted to say Colleen, but it's Carissa. So known Carissa for years. So, well, yeah, welcome to the field school. The first week is going to be virtual, as you all have seen. And how we, always start our programs out, field schools and expeditions, is just doing a round of introductions where everybody goes around and introduces themselves. And even though we're doing this virtually, we wanted to do this introductions to start out the week-long program, or the month-long program, but the week-long virtual part of the program, because over the next week we want to, even though it's being held virtually, we want to have all of us know each other and then feel free to communicate. And by the end of the week, we'll already be a fully functioning virtual team, but ready to hit the ground running on when everybody arrives on Sunday night to do dinner and then Monday in the field. So I'll go ahead and start. My name is Matt Reeves. I'm Director of Archaeology. I've been at Montpelier since May of 2000. So just passed my 21st anniversary. I don't know if that means I can drink at work, but hey, so, my focus has been on archaeology of the African diaspora for years now. Before I was here, I was at the National Park Service at Manassas Battlefield. Prior to that, did contract work in New York State, Virginia, Maryland, but then did my dissertation research in on 2 early 19th century enslaved communities down in Jamaica. So have a real interest in African-American archaeology, but then also public archaeology. And it's been very much a focus of what we do at Montpelier over the past 20 years. So really excited to have you all here. And one thing we're going to do in this is also talk about, a place that has meaning to you, because today's theme is power of place. We'll be talking about that in the discussions we have about the history of the property that we'll do right after introductions. But a place that has had a lot of meaning for me recently has been, I'm going to riff off of you, Terry, is my own backyard. Been doing a lot of planting and just where I am. I'm in my sunroom. I look right out on my backyard. My daughter and I, she's been home from, she just graduated from tech. So we spent the last week doing a lot of plantings out there. So continue to build up all the memories here. So, and I'll go ahead and pass it over to Terry. You're next to me. So Terry, why don't you go?
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. My name is Terry Brock. I'm the Assistant Director for Archaeology here at Montpelier. So that means that I'm primarily in charge of all the stuff that happens outside, which used to not mean the lab, but now the lab's outside. So I have to figure out another way of saying what it is I'm in charge of. But the field excavation, for the most part, everything that gets the archaeology and the artifacts to the lab. Once it passes whatever the threshold is to the lab, it becomes Mary's responsibility and no longer mine. So I've been at Montpelier for 7 years. I'm from Michigan originally. I went to Kalamazoo College, tiny liberal arts school up there in Michigan, and got my PhD at Michigan State University in the anthropology department. Did my dissertation work down at historic St. Mary's City in Southern Maryland. And right out of graduate school, came here to this job, working here at Montpelier. So I have a lot of interest in archaeology of the African diaspora, specifically an interest in plantation studies, and public archaeology, working with the public, doing engaged research and scholarship, and digital archaeology stuff. So I love GIS. I love using social media for public engagement. I'm really interested in the intersections of where the digital tools can be used to do public archaeology. It's been one of my real interests over the last decade and a half. I live down here in Henrico, just outside of Richmond. So I've got a bit of a trek, although I now have colleagues who do it with me. But a place that is important to me, actually, I was going to also say my backyard. I too get to look at my backyard, which is right there. And it has been a really important oasis for our family during pandemic times. And I get to just look outside and watch my children run around and play, because mine are 4. So haven't quite made it to college yet. But that's definitely been a place that's been really, really important and meaningful to all of us. I got to spend a lot of time in it yesterday planting things. So anyway, place that's been important to me is my backyard. And I will pass it to Dennis, who's next to me.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Mhm.
All right, my name is Dennis. I do the metal detecting surveys here. I've been here for 7 years now. I came on an expedition as a break to get away from work, and I've been here ever since. My experience is I was a land surveyor for several years, and then I was an unexploded ordnance technician with the Army Corps of Engineers, and now I'm here. Love it. A special place that I recently realized how much I enjoy is I'm the caretaker of a neighboring plantation home here. It's beautiful, 110 acres. I get to maintain it and make it look all pretty, and just spend almost as much time at home as I do at work. So, but that's pretty much it. So I'll pass it on to whoever wants it.
Why don't we go down to, well, to my right is Margaret.
Hi, my name is Margaret. I studied archaeology at Randolph-Macon College over in Ashland, Virginia, which is near Richmond, and I'm from upstate New York. And yeah, I've been spending all of my time in my yard during the pandemic as well with my family, just planting things.
We're in upstate.
Rochester.
Nice. Dug a few shovel test pits out that way.
Cool.
All right, thanks, Margaret. We'll go down to Emily.
Hi, I'm Emily. I just graduated in 2020 with my undergrad in history. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio, so that's cool. And a place that's meaningful for me is probably my grandparents' old house, which is now my brother's house, but it holds a lot of special memories because we went there like practically every holiday and things like that. So it's a really lots of memories, even though it looks a little different now.
Thanks, Emily. We'll go over to you, Rebecca. Oh, you're muted, Rebecca.
Sorry. Sorry. I would really work on this.
We didn't hear the last one, so you're good.
God. I'm a graduate student at UC Santa Cruz. My research interests actually were in Haiti and the former French colonial, Saint-Domingue. Looking at, the Galliffet plantation system where the Haitian Revolution began. But due to like the political unrest that's going on there and, the Ponderosa, I had to change. So I'm actually shifting my research to kind of the Chesapeake Mid-Atlantic region, and I'm not familiar with that at all. So I'm taking this next year to, do the research, become familiar with the literature, and hopefully, become acquainted with, the economies that were prevalent in the area. Because I mean, the Caribbean and the eastern coast of the United States are completely different entities. So yeah, I do, plantation archaeology. I am also from upstate New York. And I currently live in Ithaca, but I'm from a small little town called Watkins Glen, which is at the base of Seneca Lake. And that's actually probably, the place of power for me. I hate California. I think it's horrible. It's either like crazy dry or on fire. So being at the lake is kind of like, yeah, it's my powerful place. So yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Rebecca. Watkins Glen is beautiful. Doug shoveled test pits there as well. Worked for New York DOT for a while. Lizzie, we're going to have you go next.
Yeah, I'm Lizzie. I graduated from San Francisco State in 2019 with my major archaeology. My focus was really zooarchaeology. I got really into animal bones. And then I just had to pause. I was getting my welding certification, so that's kind of like my happy place. I love being in the shop. It's calming and fun. So that's just, yeah. I hate California too. I hate it so much. So I get that. I've lived Northern California. I grew up in the Valley. I've been on the Central Coast for a little bit now. Yeah, I'm ready to leave the state. So, yeah, it's me.
Thanks, Lizzie. I'm hoping my son hates California too, because he's working out there now and I miss him a lot. So pass your all's energy to Cole. So Olivia, you're up next.
Hey, hi, I'm Olivia. I just graduated from the University of Maryland, College Park, with my undergraduate degree in anthropology and archaeology. My happy, like, I just, like, for this week, I moved out of my apartment and I'm back, like, home, but all I can hear right now is just the din of cicadas. And I love it. Yeah, so I'm definitely just happy, just like looking outside and seeing all the cicadas flying by right now.
Well, hopefully you'll get out of there before they start dying and smelling.
Yeah.
That's what's next.
We were up in Maryland this weekend and my kids we went to a park and it was just cicada fest. So
Yeah, my dog's been having a fun time like snacking on them.
Thanks, Olivia. Bring some cicadas back when you come next week. We don't have any in Orange. I don't know what's wrong with this place. Chris, you're up next.
Hey everyone, I'm Chris. I'm the crew chief here. So my job is to assist Terry with keeping the site running. So you all will be spending a lot of time with me, especially in unit excavation at the blacksmith site, which is pretty cool. So if you're into welding and stuff, Lizzie, there's some metal component. We're finding lots of metal stuff, probably some forge welded stuff too, which is pretty cool. I've been here since May of 2017. So just over my 4-year mark here. Before working here, I worked at historic St. Mary's City, which is a 17th century site. I worked on a 17th, 18th century site there. And I graduated from St. Mary's College of Maryland with a BA in history and English before turning over to the dark side of archaeology, which pulled me in just because Terry, wahaha. Just compelled by the vast questions you can ask from all the stuff that isn't just in the documentary record. I finished in 2020 my master's degree to the University of Leicester in historical archaeology, and I wrote my thesis on enslaved uses and perspectives of the temple. You'll probably see we've got a lot of temple branding on everything here at Montpelier, and there's this red dome structure in front of the main house. So there's lots of stories about that site that have to be told. As such, my interests are, at least in the last 4 years, have been plantation archaeology, colonial archaeology, and definitely public archaeology, and lately blacksmithing. So I'm super pumped for you all to get here next week. Very excited.
Thanks, Chris.
Oh, an important place, just the temple. To not draw that out.
Thanks, Chris. And Mac, you're next.
Sorry, wouldn't unmute. Okay. Hi, I'm Max. I came to Montpelier in 2017 as an expeditioner, but I did leave, but I came back again a couple times for field school in 2019. And then I graduated from college with my BA in anthropology from Indiana University. And now I'm here, which I'm super excited to be here for field school. My special place right now is probably my grandparents' house. It's like a historic 1860s cabin. And I kind of had my childhood there, and it made me super interested in history and archaeology. Yeah, that's it.
Cool, thanks, Matt. And Kiana.
Hey everyone, my name is Kiana Wilkerson and I am a field school assistant. Well, I'm going to be helping you guys all during field school. I graduated from William & Mary in 2018 with a BA in history and anthropology. I'm now currently at Virginia Tech getting my master's in history. And right now my focus is looking at African-American representation in 1990s comics. So if you want to talk about comics with me, let me know, because for the project is not just looking at comics, is looking at like how Blackness is told through visual media. Let's see, what else? Yeah, I came in 2019 here for field school, was an intern for a couple of months afterwards, and now I'm back. So that's kind of my history with Montpelier. I would say my favorite place right now, it's gonna sound really corny, but I just got a cat, and I'm not living with him because you're not allowed to have pets at Arlington House, which is fair, because he would destroy it. But wherever he is kind of like my home right now. His name is Walt. When you guys come, I will be showing you pictures of him. But he's really cute. He's living at my parents' house right now, so that's kind of my home right now.
I love it. Thanks, Kiana. Jennifer, you're up next.
Hey guys, I'm Jennifer. I graduated William & Mary in 2018 and came here for the archaeology field school in 2019. My happy place would be, I feel like I use this one a lot, but I love it there. It's a little town in Southwest Virginia. There's very little around. Getting a Walmart was a big deal. There's a bowling alley and that's about it. But there's just something very peaceful. And I've had a lot of family down there, so I've got a lot of good memories tied to that area.
Thanks, Jennifer. What's the little town, Jennifer?
Jonesville.
Jonesville. Okay, cool. And Mary, you're up next.
All right. So, is this working?
Yep.
Am I coming through? Okay. So my name is Mary Furlong-Minkoff. I'm the curator of archaeological collections here at Montpelier. I've been here about 5.5 years, and before I came here, I worked in the National Park Service. I did my PhD at the University of Maryland in College Park. And I did my master's degree at the University of West Florida, which is in Pensacola. And I did my undergraduate work at the University of Mississippi in Oxford, Mississippi. So I've sort of bounced around the entire Southeast and through the Mid-Atlantic doing archaeology for the past 20-ish years. I run our archaeology lab. I work really closely with our curatorial staff to help develop furnishing plans, to do exhibitions, anything kind of involving with objects and things, sort of caring for them. We have over 3 million archaeological objects in our collections, so they're very rich. And let's see, a place that's really important to me is, I was just thinking about this. So one of the things I looked at my dissertation was I applied sensory theories to looking at archaeology. And one place that's always been really important to me is this place right when you get off the turnpike and onto I-4 in Orlando, Florida, which is where I'm from. And there was a Merita bread factory there. And you would take this bend, and before you even saw it, you could smell the fresh bread baking. And that smell at night is how I always knew I was home. So I'd kind of come around the corner and you'd smell that. And I'd drive the rest of the way home with my windows down and go from bread to orange blossoms to jasmine to fresh cut grass. And that was sort of the smell of coming home into Central Florida at night in spring and summer. That's what it smells like. So all my memories of coming home from college or grad school or wherever have that very closely tied to them. So I think being in my car and smelling Florida is a very special place to me.
That's cool. Thanks, Mary. Haven't heard that story before. So, and on the very bottom of the screen, we have Alicia.
Hi, my name is Alicia. I'm a junior at BU studying archaeology. I'm from Brockton, which is like 20 miles away from Boston, and I've lived here my whole life and enjoy it here. I think a place of power, or just like a place that I like, would be the beach, any beach. Just the sound of the waves and the smell of the ocean and walking on the sand is something I really enjoy.
Cool, thanks, Alicia. Well, for the rest of the time before we do the Power of Place lecture, we're gonna Terry wanted to have us talk about the values document, and we're gonna get into some of the details of, you know, being at Montpelier, field safety, all that when you all get here next week. But what we wanted to do was to really just spend some time getting the getting us all kind of getting the esprit de corps or the ethos of the department out and talk about that. And what we're going to do after that is we're going to go into the Power of Place lecture, and that'll be I'm giving that lecture, and field school students will stay on. The rest of the staff is gonna take off and be doing other things. And then when we're done with the Power of Place lecture, Terry and Mary are going to come back, and we're going to talk about basically what to expect for the rest of this week. Make sure that the website is working. If you have any questions about navigating the online course, we can talk about that then. And then any questions that y'all might have about the rest of the week, grading, etc. So Terry, it looks like you just put a note into the chat for the values document. And so you can go ahead and click on that, and that'll bring that up. And I think we went over this a little bit the last time. And Terry, you wanted to dive into some details. Was there any particular area or wanted to go over it all again?
I think we could just go over it. I mean, we can go over it briefly, but it's a really important set of, I think we did talk about it a little bit at the first meeting we had a couple weeks ago, but this is really this sets the framework for how our department works, and how we all choose to engage with each other, engage with the public, engage with you all, and it really sets the culture of what we are as a department and how we're situated. And you know, as a bunch of anthropologists, you know, right, we both study culture, but we also like participate and actively are within cultures, and so we wanted to make sure that our department had one that was well defined, because no matter where you work, a culture is going to form, right? Like the place you work is going to establish something, and you can either choose to be a part of defining what that is, right? Or it's going to take shape in some way that you don't have any control over. So we decided, just to give you some background on this, about 4 or 5 years ago, we had a department with a certain subset of staff where that culture just magically formed in a way that we all really, really liked. And as tends to happen in our department, our staff and our interns were moving on to new things, new jobs, or it's people advancing their careers, which we're really excited about and love to see. But we all decided that we really kind of wanted to capture whatever it was that was making our department work that way, and see if we could sort of put some labels on it. So we did a workshop with the entire team, and we came up with it's a number of values, but we came up with a nice list, and worked up a document to kind of capture what that was, who we were, and who we wanted to continue to be, and who we wanted to become as a department. This is a document that we go back to annually as a department, that we revisit, that we, and by when I say we, I don't just mean like me, Matt, and Mary. I mean everyone who's on the team, all the interns, all of the staff. We all get together and we talk about this, refine it, reshape it, talk about it, what's working, what's not. Are we meeting these things? What do we need to work on? What do we need to do better? It's a real intentional and active process that we go through, and it's given our department a common set of tools and a common set of a common language, so that we can talk to each other about topics and issues that may be kind of right. Like it's tough to have a meeting with somebody and be like, hey, you're just being a jerk, and I need you to not be a jerk, right? Like that's sort of a, like, we just kind of expected you to not be a jerk, but now you're being one, and we don't really, but now I can, Chris can sit down with me and say, look, you've not been very respectful of the staff lately. And one of our values is mutual respect. And, this is like, here's some examples, and these are places where, we think that you need to work on and improve, right? It gives us language, and it sets expectations for all of us to have open communication about whatever issues may be happening. So this is one of, and that, like, I literally just talked about 3 values right there. There's accountability, right? Which is Chris coming to me and saying, you need to, change your ways, and me saying, you're right, I do. There's the issue at hand, which is mutual respect. And there's this expectation of open communication, right? Which is Chris feeling like that ability, that line of communication is open between the two of us, so that he knows he can have that conversation with me. So anyway, this document lays these things out. And I think it's worth just kind of going through them a little bit. So first, there's our departmental mission, right? Which is to inspire civic engagement through the discovery, preservation, and interpretation of Montpelier's Madison era landscape and other cultural and archaeological resources through cutting edge methods and research, professional development, public engagement, and citizen science. You're going to see hopefully you are going to see all of those things during your time here, because they're all things that we try to emphasize through what we teach you all in field school. So the first one's accountability. Again, I kind of mentioned this one a little bit already, but it is being accountable for yourself, right? Being accountable to, right? This is a mindset that that we expect you all to adapt, and that we use as well, to both hold each other accountable and hold yourself accountable. And in particular to the values that are listed in this document. So accountability is kind of this umbrella value, right? That attaches to all of these things. Professionalism is the next one. We are a professional department. We are members of professional organizations. We adhere to ethical statements that are held by the Society for Historical Archaeology. We participate in our professional organizations. We do research. We present that research. We engage in academic scholarship. We participate in the museum. We're museum professionals as well. So we have multiple professions that we all participate in. We try to comport ourselves in professional ways. This doesn't mean we don't have fun, right? But it does mean that we are serious about our work and our scholarship, and we take it seriously. and want to contribute and be a place and to be participants in our professional organizations. All of us are members of a professional organization. Matt, Marion, and I have all held leadership positions within the Society for Historical Archaeology and other organizations. So, so it's something that we take seriously. And while you are working at Montpelier, you will be held to the SHA ethical standards while you're doing research here, because that's how our work goes. So I'd encourage you to look at those links when you get a chance. The next one is learning. This is literally the one, this is why you are here, right? And the field school is one of the ways that we act out this value, is by doing a field school every year. But learning is more than just engaging in the academic process of opening a textbook and reading it and going and attending a field school. I consider myself to be learning all of the time. I will always be learning things from my staff, from students, from expeditioners, from the descendant committee, from metal detectors who come and work with us, right? There's always an opportunity to learn. I do not know everything, and I will often answer your questions with, I do not know, because I don't. And so when I don't know the answer to something, that's an opportunity for me to learn something new, right? And so this is a really important value, because it encapsulates kind of who we are. I mean, the acronym for our public program is literally LEARN, right? It's the Learn Archaeology program. So, so this is one that we very much embrace. This also means that we don't expect you all to know everything. We don't expect ourselves to know everything. So we certainly don't expect you all to know everything. I'm far more interested, I know we all are far more interested in you all asking questions and working to figure things out, asking for help, feeling comfortable with failing. You are going to mess up. You'll read tomorrow, there's a whole section about archaeological excavation where I talk about messing up. You will mess up. It is okay. One of the things you learn in archaeology very quickly is that you're going to make mistakes, and there's literally nothing you can do about it. You will dig a unit. You will dig a unit too deep. It will happen. You will cut into another strat. It will happen. You will label a bag wrong. It's going to happen. You will all do it over the next month. The important thing is owning up to the mistake. It's acknowledging that you made a mistake. It's communicating that you made the mistake to other people and writing it down in the paperwork so that we all know that the mistake happened, right? And we'll either all work together to figure out how we can fix the mistake if it's fixable, or we'll write it down so that we know that it happened, because mistakes in archaeology also affect the data and the way it gets collected. And it's important for us to know when a mistake happens so that the data makes sense, right? But this is not a place.
Go ahead. We brought you all on because we know you're not robots. If you were robots, you wouldn't make mistakes, but it'd be pretty terrifying. So thanks for not being robots.
Yeah.
And it's a space where failing and making mistakes is zero judgment, at all. It's just this part of archaeology, and we all know there's a process for all the mistakes. So it's something that we have things in place to make up for it, and it's not a big deal.
Yeah. And it's also, I mean, understanding that mistakes happen and that they are going to happen is why we have a very large archaeology field guide, and why we expect you all to read it, and why we need to learn all of the tools that we're using, right? So that we can reduce the mistakes that will happen. Because we certainly, we don't want mistakes to happen, but they will, right? But it is, I just want you to, I think it's important to know that this is a space where mistakes are okay, because we can learn from those mistakes, and it's not the end of the world. One of the reasons why we have such a big guide is because we've made a lot of mistakes, and we've tried to figure out methods and ways to avoid them or catch them before they happen. Or it is a process from learning from those mistakes, right? Mutual respect. is the next one. Again, we respect each other as professionals, as human beings. We assume best intentions. We understand that everyone here is a full human being, and that we have empathy for people that we disagree with, and we respect the diversity of experiences. We're interested in other people's opinions, because we know that their experiences are valid and that they matter, and that they're a part of everything that's going on. We also actively fight discrimination wherever possible by adopting anti-discriminatory policies, right? And we're going to talk more about this, particularly on the last day of this week, but throughout field school. This is one of the reasons why we're doing anti-racism training for you all and for our whole team at the end of this week, and throughout field school. But this is really important work that we all need to do, right? Examine, critique, question, and understand our privileges, our biases, all of those things. It helps us do better research. It helps us do better engagement. It helps us be better people, and it helps create a space within our department where hopefully everyone feels respected and worthy, because we all are, right? So that's a really, really critical and important piece of who we are as a department. And again, on Friday, we'll get more into some of the details of that. And I've put a link to an article that Matt Mary and I have written about how we are adopting anti-racist policies and practices within our department. So looking forward to hearing your thoughts on that piece as well. If you have questions about any of this, like, jump in. We have all month to talk about all this stuff too, but open communication and transparency, which is what made me think, like, if you have questions, you should ask them, because it's a thing we value. This is really important. If there is something about this experience that you don't like, or that is rubbing you the wrong way, or a person that is bothering you, or whatever it is, please feel free to communicate that to the person, to each other, to your supervisor, what have you. Also, we need to be open to receiving feedback. We're going to be giving you feedback halfway through this field school. You're going to sit down with your supervisor and they're going to give you feedback about your performance. This is part of working. This is part of being a human being, right? We can't learn if we don't get the feedback that we need to do better. So we need to be open and receptive to receiving that feedback. Part of open communication is also being an active listener, right? So it's not just talking, it's also listening, and hearing different perspectives and hearing the person who's speaking to you. And we also want to focus on creating a courageous space. And I know this link was broken earlier. Thank you, Rebecca, for catching that for me. But the courageous space document is one I'd encourage you to look at. So this is kind of an expansion on, was something used in the anti-racism training that we've all done at the Society for Historical Archaeology, but is this idea of creating courageous spaces, not necessarily safe spaces, but courageous ones, spaces where people feel empowered to be vulnerable and to share, and to not feel like they're going to be attacked or anything like that because of the experience that they're sharing. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that as well. Open communication. Another thing I'd like you to look at is the Scrum for Archaeology piece. This is our project management workflow. Seems like a weird thing to put in here, but it is a tool and a practice that we engage in that allows all of us to participate, the whole department to participate in how we communicate about the project and where it's going and what we need to get done every other week. We have an all staff meeting where we called Scrum, where we meet and go through everything we've done over the last 2 weeks, what we want to get done over the coming 2 weeks, how it helps us meet our project goals. all of these things. We have one scheduled for tomorrow, FYI. Montpelier team. But you'll be engaging in some of this process as well through daily stand-ups, which means every morning you will assemble with your supervisor and you will talk about what your goals are for that day, what you accomplished the day before, and what stood in your way from accomplishing those goals the day before. A process for communicating about the work that we need to get done. The next one is publicly focused. We are a publicly focused department. It means that almost everything we do, we are at least thinking or asking the question, how can we engage the public in this process? Or how will this impact the publics and the stakeholders and the communities that we work with? Or where are the communities, the stakeholders that we work with in this? Or can we take this step without the community? We probably can't. We probably should include the community in it, right? This is a really important piece of who we are as a department, and is increasingly more and more becoming a part of who our organization is. And I think while you are here, you will see some really amazing steps that the Montpelier Foundation is in the process of taking as far as our relationship with not just the public that comes and visits, but the descendant committee and the community of descendants that that we work with. This is all really, really important, important work. And but being publicly focused does not mean we are public first. There's a difference, right? Public first means the customer is always right, right? And that we do anything and everything just to make customers, visitors happy, and that is not always the case. The amount of times I have been told and asked if I'm the overseer because I'm managing a group of archaeologists on a plantation by a visitor is staggering, right? Right, that customer is not right, right? That requires a conversation that we have. So we do not have the expectation of you or any of our staff that if a customer or a visitor is making you uncomfortable, that you have to sit there and take it. Some of us are more comfortable dealing with visitors like that than others. I'm fine with it. I'm happy to have that conversation with that visitor, and I'm happy to and want to step in if you want me to redirect a visitor like that that comes up to the site. But that is not an expectation that we have. The customer is not always right here. The publicly focused part is the part where we have a site that visitors are allowed to come visit, right? And we do have the expectation that we at least greet every visitor that comes to the site, right? So at any rate, we are publicly focused. This means that if you're late for a meeting and it's because a visitor stopped and asked you for directions and you ended up talking to them for 20 minutes and it made you late, awesome, way to do your job, right? Like, thank you for doing your job. Your job is to talk to that visitor. At any rate, there's a handful of resources. This has been work that we've been doing for a long time. We are a museum. Part of our institutional mission is to work with people who are not archaeologists, not professionals, not historians, and help them learn about what happened at Montpelier. Choose positivity is the next one. This does not mean that you are not allowed to have feelings and that your only feeling that you're allowed to have is one of positivity. This simply means that we think archaeology should be fun. We think that it should be engaging, and we try to create a space where we approach the world through a positive lens when we're at work. There are plenty of days where I come to work and I'm not feeling particularly positive, right? Maybe I had a long battle with my kid the night before about whether or not they should wear pajamas, right? Like, these things happen. And so part of the thing that I always try and do on days like that is either I call in and I say, no, I'm not going to be able to bring my best self to work today. So maybe I need to call in sick, right? Or maybe I need to take the day off or whatever, right? I need to tell Matt, look, like today's just not happening. It's a bad day. And Matt will say, that's great, Terry. Thank you for telling us. Like, no one wants to see grumpy, cranky Terry at work all day, right? I will also tell my team if I do decide to come in, like, look, it was a rough morning. It's going to take me a little bit to get myself to where I need to be my best self. And just giving you all a heads up on that for today or for this morning. Like, I just need some extra. I'm going to need some extra time or a little extra space so that I can get myself to that, to that level of expectation. So that is. So it's a value that we do hold. This does not mean like super bubbly all the time expectation. It means just looking through the world through a positive lens, but glass half full. Finding joy in your work, and again, assuming best intentions of the people who are around you. The last one is family. This is something that you all are officially a part of, which is the Montpelier family. We treat each other while they are here and after they leave as members of a big family, a high functioning and a family that you want to be a part of family. So this means that we treat, again, each other with respect. It means we treat our workplace as if it were our own home, right? Whether that's Arlington House, or that's the archaeology lab, or it's the archaeology site, or it's the Montpelier property, right? If you see a piece of garbage on the ground, pick it up. If a tool needs to be put away, put it away, right? When you are putting tools away, put them away in the right place, right? Just the kinds of things that treat our spaces and treat each other, with that kind of family, that idea, that ethos of family. So this means that some of the ways we act this out is every year when we go to the SHA conference, we have a big party and we invite everyone who's had anything to do with Montpelier archaeology to it, right? We usually take over a bar somewhere and invite former field school students, staff members, colleagues that we collaborate with, to that, expedition members who are in the area, we invite, right? And it's a way to celebrate our, the people that we work with and that we care about. That is, part of being a member of a family, and that's something that we really try to live up to. So hopefully while you're here, you will feel like you are becoming part of a bigger family, and will be connected to us for a long time, whether you want to or not. We're at least going to send you emails all the time, so you've got that. Just like any good family that sends too many emails. But I just wanted to review those with all of you because they are really really central and critical to who we are. They are part of, not for nothing, they're also part of how we evaluate your performance during field school. This is part of how we hire. We ask interview questions that are geared towards these values so that we know that we're hiring people who are going to be interested in working at a place that stands for these kinds of things. We hired Chris because he literally said the word learn like 800 times during his interview. It was insane. He was like, I love teaching people. I want people to learn stuff. It was like his whole interview, every question he answered somehow with that. So we're like, well, we got to hire this guy, right? So so anyway, take some time with this document. There is a one of the quiz questions is going to be about this document. Take some time with it. Spend some time in some of those links if you want to. If you have any questions about any of them, or feel free to ask. But this is something that we take pretty seriously, and hope you're interested in joining us with.
And we obviously put a lot of energy towards this document, and we also want to be responsible to everybody, because we are going to be asking a lot of you all, because when you all come on the field school, you're representing archaeology to the rest of Montpelier. So what you all do is representing our department. And then when you're talking with visitors, you all are representing Montpelier to the outside world. And so we take that seriously, but then we also want to make sure that we, on the other way, take the responsibility of taking care of all of you all in a proper way, with having values that we all are accountable for. So it's our department has become known for this at Montpelier, for these values. And it's something that, over the past 5 years, a lot of these values have come out at Montpelier, which is great. I mean, it's been reflected in how departments interrelate with each other here at Montpelier. And I think you're going to see a lot of people coming out to see the site and visit us, and you'll get to know more than just the archaeologist at Montpelier, more than us. You'll get to meet, our bosses like Elizabeth Chu, Roy Young, who's the president. Elizabeth Chu is the vice president for museum programs. And Elizabeth Chu with the museum program, she's in charge of archaeology, curatorial, education, and interpretation with the guides, and then also the architectural department and the research department. And then Roy Young is the president, and he's in charge of everything, buildings and grounds, the development office, and then also museum programs. And so this is, these documents are ones that help you interact with basically everybody and have, all of us interact successfully with everybody else. So it's a good document to have to look at and understand, and it helps you ask questions. So what we're going to do from here is, if any of the crew have anything else to add on the document, for this week, what we're going to be doing is getting you all with today's lecture ready to take on the online portion of the field school. And I'm gonna start this out with a lecture on power of place, and then after that Terry, Mary, and I will reconvene with you all to see if you have any questions about the syllabus or the online course. So did I leave anything out there, Terry, Mary, Chris?
Carissa just joined us, so you want to
I was just going to say, Chris is here.
Oh, hey, Carissa, how are you?
Carissa.
Good to see ya.
Hey, sorry.
I have to hop off because I've got a 1 o'clock, but I will see you all shortly. So
cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, Terry.
I was just going to add one thing about the document. Like, all those values kind of marry together very well and interrelate. So some of them, like Terry was saying, the choose positivity thing doesn't mean like you can't have bad feelings or think that someone is doing something in a way that, doesn't work. Like, if I'm teaching a certain way that does not work with you, that doesn't mean you have to say like, well, he's teaching me, so that's like good. Like, the learning, mutual respect, all of those things, you can feel like we want you to feel comfortable bringing us whatever learning style works best for you. Or if someone is saying something that doesn't make you feel safe or comfortable here, we're going to respect that and value that. So all those things work very well together, and none of them overpower the other, if that makes sense. That was my only thing to add.
Thanks, Chris. That's well said.
Okay.
So do you want to let Carissa introduce herself and
Yeah,
give her,
Carissa, if you can introduce yourself.
You've done this before, Carissa, so a place that's powerful or important to you.
All right. Hi, I'm Carissa Trotta. I'm here in Durham, North Carolina. As Mary said, I've done this before a little bit. I'm an expedition member for 6 years, and so I'm excited to be doing this as a month. So power of place that's important to me. on the spot trying to think. I guess right now what I'm going to say is our new room that we built. It was built by hand, and I worked together with my partner to build that and did things that I didn't think I could do, like put up drywall and build cabinets and a bookshelf. It took us 1.5 to 2 years to get completed, but we did it, and we did it just the two of us. And so it's a really safe place. It's a really warm place. All my books are on all of the shelves. And it's a place for just the two of us as we moved into it. So it holds a lot of meaning in that regard, and a lot of positive experience. So thanks.
And then Hannah joined us too. So Hannah, do you want to introduce yourself and give your place?
Yeah, hi, I'm Hannah James. I'm one of the archaeology technicians. And I guess for me, a special place has really been my back porch at my apartment in Richmond. You know, I don't get to see a lot of people, but when we do, we sit out on the back porch, we enjoy the fresh air, and it's been a really nice place to have.
Thanks, Anna. And what we'll do at this point, Carissa, we recorded the last hour, so I'll go ahead and send that to you at the end of and after the Power of Place lecture. But what we'll do is we'll go into the Power of Place lecture, and that's going to be basically covering some of the highlights of what we discovered about the landscape in archaeology and what makes archaeology important at Montpelier. And like I said, we'll take a break after that, and I'll text Mary and Terry to come on back online to do some wrap up details for today on working the website. So cool. All right, we'll see the crew. See y'all either later today or tomorrow. And yeah, what I'll do is I will go ahead. Is everybody good? Does anybody need to take a bio break or get food? Is everybody set to go for like about an hour, or do you all need like a 5-minute? Good to go? Okay. All right, sounds good. Well, I'll go ahead and share screens here. Let me get over to my PowerPoint here. Let's see. And there. And I was adding some things in there, go all the way to the top. Can you all see the, it says the buried truth? And let me get you all up on my other screen. Yeah, there you are. So you all can see the screen now? Cool. All right. Well, we'll spend about an hour talking about some of the landscape at Montpelier. And we've, you know, really, Montpelier is almost two different landscapes. You've got, you know, in terms of what we have today, there's the visitor landscape that visitors see when they're here at Montpelier, but then there's also what Montpelier is, which is the 2,650 acres, which is, you know, a lot of land. And over the next month, what is so exciting about the field school is you get to learn way more than what the average visitor sees. We're going to be going on tours of parts of the landscape that most people have never seen before. Like my favorite is the Eastwoods. That's the one that's near and dear to my heart. And Carissa, I don't think even you've been out in the Eastwoods. Oh, you did it once? Okay.
Last season, you took us out on a quick tour, right? Oh no, that was Chicken Mountain.
That was Chicken Mountain. Yeah, that was Chicken Mountain. So yeah, but yeah, the Eastwoods is way on this map. It's way over in this area. Chicken Mountain is here, and then the visitor center and the main house and where we're working is all in this area right here. And I'll point all that out as we go. But with what we've got at Montpelier in terms of the historic landscape, it really brings to mind the power of place, which is kind of is something we operate off of, is that, you know, being in a space where the history occurred embeds it with a certain amount of power. And I wanted to ask you all a question before we get started. What does power of place mean to you all? I mean, have you all ever been at a place where, either, from your own personal travels through visiting historic homes, what does power of place mean to you? And if you could either talk about it, like what it means to you, or give an example of it. And there's no right answer on this. Power of place is very loosely defined. There is a literature base on it, but for this, we're always like to kind of open it up and see what people's first reaction is. So this is like a knee-jerk reaction. There's no like, there is the one power of place and you have to go with that. What does it bring to mind for like a historic property?
So for me, it's actually just like a connection. When we're talking about like our favorite places and where we're being, that's where we can, I guess, be ourselves to the fullest extent. And I mean, again, because I study plantation landscapes, the enslaved domestic spaces probably would have been a very powerful place, that mitigated some of their daily lives.
Cool. So it's that personal connection you can make with it.
Yes.
That's cool.
For me, I think it's also an emotional connection, that you walk into a space and there's a feeling that you get as well. So there's some type of emotional work. I've been working at a local cemetery, and sometimes you just step on that land and you feel this kind of emotion about the space.
Yeah, Alicia.
Like in a broader sense, I also think of like the National Register of Historical Places that like has this list of places that they choose as important places based on like either what happened there or who lived there and things like that, or how old it is.
So a little more predefined in a way, and it does give it power in a different sense. So yeah, these are all great. One day I want to make a word cloud with all these. I always write them down with each group. So anybody else, just anything that comes to mind?
I think that just knowing that this place had an impact, like it left a mark on history, and like we still recognize like its past and how it relates to the present.
So that, yeah, those connections through time and discovering that is a really cool part of archaeology. Is like there is the history that can be defined in many ways, like you're defining, Alicia, by like who owned it, who was there, but then also like actions that we don't even know happened until we discover them through archaeology. Like you all are going to be discovering this month is, some of the sites that are there that we're discovering and what those actions were. Cool. Anybody else? Margaret, Emily, or Lizzie? Anything come to mind?
For me, I think of the significance of what's happened on that land, and it becomes sort of imbued with the energy of what's happened there. I remember reading a book called The Icon Hunter, and it was about a Greek Cypriot woman, and she had been there for the Turkish invasion. And she basically was out hunting down the mosaics that were in her church when she was a kid, and they'd been there for so many years that it wasn't so much about the mosaics themselves, it was that people had prayed to them, and then by that it had given them significance. And I think it's the same thing with a place. We start to think of it in terms of it's not just a place, it's the site of something extremely significant or traumatic that's happened.
Yeah, there's a lot of visitors when they come, they feel that whether it's a personal connection that draws them to feel that energy, or just being in a certain spot. You know, it's hard to say, but that is real. That is really real. It's and it's amazing to see people experience that.
Yeah, like I've traveled with my friends, and through my studies and stuff, I'll be like freaking out and want to go somewhere, and then it's just like they don't understand, and then once I explain it, I've watched them kind of change their reactions to like being annoyed that I dragged them there to being like really understanding and excited about the situation.
Mhm. So
Yeah.
you brought the power of place to them.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Thanks, Lizzie.
I don't know. An example for me is like I visited a lot of like Gettysburg and like Antietam, places like that. I don't know. There's always that connection there, I guess, when you're standing there and you're like realizing everything that's happened at those places. And I don't know, like for me, that connection, like emotionally and everything, is just, it makes it really powerful.
Yeah, and also knowing that there's so at all these places there's history that's interpreted, but then there's also the history that isn't interpreted that's still there. And so and we've got a lot of that. I think what you all have talked about with Power of Place, it really it helps synthesize what we're going to be talking about for the next hour or so, which is what we've got at Montpelier, what we discovered through the archaeology, what we interpret today, what we don't interpret, but is there. And for Montpelier, the thing that people expect to see when they come to Montpelier is the main house, and it brought back to a certain period of time. And for us, that is, we're interpreting not just the main house, but the entire property. The time period is the 1820s. So this is the time period that James and Dolly had retired from the White House, and they came back to Montpelier to spend the remainder of their lives. And it's the time period where we've got the most information about the property as a whole, like in terms of especially the physical evidence. And that's what I'll talk a lot about, is the physical evidence that we've got at Montpelier, and how what the site we're going to be working on next month fits in with the rest of that physical evidence. And it's also a spot where that time period is a spot where we've got a lot of documents relating to visitors traveling here. But one thing we don't have is a lot of information in the documentary record about the property, is how it was operating as a plantation. You might have seen, have you all heard of John Payne Todd, is the wayward stepson? Is that name sound familiar? So he's the stepson of James Madison from Dolly's first marriage, and he is in his adult years, he's a gambler, a drunkard. He never really finds his place in life. He's blamed for putting Montpelier into an incredible amount of debt, but as we'll see, there's more to it than that. We're going to be talking about some of the history here in this PowerPoint today and in this discussion. But when you all come here, we do a highlights tour, which will go over this actually in the spots where all this happened. So you talk about Power of Place, you're going to be learning about this kind of in an abstract way, but then when you're at Montpelier, it'll be an in-depth exploration of it. But for when Dolly sold Montpelier, when Dolly Madison sold Montpelier in 1844, she sold all of the property, the house, the furnishings, and all of the enslaved community. So all the enslaved Americans that lived and worked at Montpelier were basically removed from Montpelier, sold to, in some cases, to the deep south through Richmond and Louisiana. And what was left, John Payne Todd took about 15 members of the enslaved community to his house in Gordonsville, but then he ended up with all the family documents. And when he died in the 1850s, some of Madison's nieces and nephews went to his house to sort through what was left in his house, found 2 rooms full of documents. They were related to everything that for the running of the plantation. There were slave lists, plantation books, the planners, the garden books, the farm books, everything, probably maps showing where the fields are located, the slave quarters, everything that related to Montpelier as a functioning plantation. And the nieces, nephews decided that James Madison their Uncle Jimmy was an incredible private man and didn't want any of this out in the public. So they brought all these documents to the back lawn and put a match to them. And so with that, all these documents are gone. We don't have any, complete lists of all the enslaved Americans that lived at Montpelier. What we've got to make up for that, though, is, the landscape. And this is where we've got, these incredible sites that bear witness to the labor, the lives of the enslaved Americans that lived at Montpelier. And in a very bizarre way, when the Madison's nieces and nephews burned those records, I mean, what do you think, when they burning the records that had people's names on them, what did that do to those people when you think about it? It's probably some of the only places they're listed as individuals. What happens what happened when those documents are burned?
At this point, it erases them.
Yes. Yeah, it erases them. And, whether it erases their names, it also erased the labor they did. So, if there was ever, if reparations happened in, say, 1865, which it didn't for enslaved Americans, for former enslaved Americans, there would have been no accounting for the labor and the products that the people at Montpelier did for the Madisons. And what we've got left of this, though, is what we've got in the archaeology record. And that's where, what we've found over the past, many, many decades of doing work at Montpelier is pretty much every part of the land has physical evidence of it that bears witness to the labor and the lives of the enslaved Americans who were at Montpelier. And that's really, what we're really excited about is for the next 5 years, a big focus of what we're doing in the visitor core is looking at a lot of these sites of labor and looking at them in a very different way than a lot of other archaeologists have done at plantations. And so for Montpelier, obviously there's the history of James Madison, but so much of what we're after and what is present in the archaeological record is the history of the enslaved community at Montpelier. So this picture on the bottom right, you might recognize this. This is out of a watercolor, Baroness Hyde de Neuville watercolor. It's a blow up of an enslaved mother and her child walking in front of the temple. And it's one of the few images of one of the enslaved Americans, community members at Montpelier that we've got. So it's an incredibly important one. But looking at, what you normally see how archaeology occurs at these places like plantations is so many of the times archaeologists are looking at sites where there's a lot of artifacts, where it's very evident where the sites are. And these are, the living spots for individuals. So like Terry will talk to you all a lot about this next week, which is the South Yard, the quarters for house slaves. In the South Yard, we not only found the foundations for the homes of the enslaved individuals, but also lots and lots of artifacts. And the artifacts that you find, range from ceramics, glasswares, bone, nails. And a lot of times, for these sites like the South Yard, these are the sites that get reconstructed that ended up being, represented on the landscape. And it's an incredibly important part of representing the community, because these are the homes where individuals, built their family lives. We've got a similar thing with the field quarters, and this is the visitor center is up here, and this is one of the subfloor pits we found at one of the field quarters, and we're able to use that to figure out, what these buildings looked like and actually reconstruct them on the landscape. But again, for these sites, you got lots of artifacts that relate to domestic activities. And what we're looking at, though, over the next 5 years is, more of the sites of labor, where the daily lives of enslaved Americans are spent at Montpelier. And these sites usually don't have a huge footprint in terms of either the building themselves or the artifacts. So, things like storage sheds, granaries, areas where, the items are being processed in the fields, like for crops, and the fields themselves. This is something we're interested in looking at for the home farm. And for why do you think we'd want to, locate these sites, that are incredibly ephemeral that, most people, when they come to a plantation site, they don't think about visiting some of these work spots. What do you all think we'd gain from, looking at some of these sites of labor?
Maybe like since we've already seen like the home sites, like a better understanding of like the full like daily life.
Yeah, I think I've actually got that, Alicia, as my first. Well, I got it. It's full scale restoration. Yeah, and that is something that is, full scale restoration. What we want to do at Montpelier is restore all the stories that are present at Montpelier, and all those parts of life. And what else comes to mind with some of these sites? Just first blush, what sites of labor. What does it make you think of? And also, why would we be interested in it?
So for me, I guess it would be, the type of skills that are required at each of the sites. So, I mean, again, if we're looking at the blacksmith sites or the site, then we're thinking about, all of the tools that are kind of going along with that profession. Same for anybody who's working out in the field, or I think there was a mention of a farrier shop as well so I mean, again, it's all kind of very specialized skills and knowledge.
Yeah, and that's with the lack of documentary records. We don't have a set of documents that describe all the different labor that was occurring at Montpelier. Like when the blacksmith shop moved from the temple from the 1801 out to where we're excavating it right now. We had no idea where that blacksmith shop was. That it moved. At first, we thought it might have moved down to the mill, which is off Montpelier property. And we'd have been really bummed if that was the case, because the blacksmith shop we're finding it as, we always knew it was important, but we found it has so much information about the plantation. And yeah, it's the blacksmith shop, we're able to figure out that, at the blacksmith shop dating to the 1820s, what you mentioned, the farrier shop, that seems to be so much of what is occurring at this blacksmith shop. Rather than making things, it's repairing things, and all those things relate to draft animals being latched to wagons, plows, anything that to harness that power. And so it's bringing in those parts of the labor that we don't know about, and it bears witness to it.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
So because there is a lack of documentary records for the specific plantation, has any sort of analysis been taken on like runaway slave ads? Because I mean, the runaway slave ads or adverts rather, talk about, they give you names, they give you like professions and what they left with, and so on and so forth. And I mean, it might go a long way to restoring some of the names to the individuals attached to this plantation.
Yeah, there are a number of runaway ads that relate to Montpelier. And if you all have been on Montpelier's social media page, you'd see something called the Naming Project. I don't know if you all have seen that. And it is absolutely amazing. If you just go to the Montpelier, either type in Montpelier blog Naming Project, what our main historian is doing, Hillary Hicks, is she's going through, we have about 200 names of enslaved individuals. This is from like 1723 all the way up until 1844. And she's writing down all the information that we've researched on each one of those. And she's taking it one person at a time. So that's a great place to look. But, so much, just like the runaway ads, not every runaway was documented through an ad. Most people didn't run away. And there's so much in between, but it's like, it's like the archaeology. Not all actions are going to be recorded through the archaeology, but, taking all of these bits of information together, we're able to form a more complete picture. And most important thing is it's, not taking no for an answer. Just say, because those records are burned doesn't mean that we can't say anything about the enslaved community that was at Montpelier, and start to get into a lot of details. So, and you'll learn that, how we do archaeology at Montpelier is to try to dig out every piece of information we can, not only from the soil that we're excavating, but then also from the record itself, whether it be soil samples, pollen, not leaving any stone unturned in the research that we're doing. So yeah, these are questions that we're going to be looking at. And again, where we're finding the most complete record of this is from the archaeology. And this is, in terms of power of place, when you think about it, the archaeology is kind of like the ultimate detective tool for power of place, because you're finding these artifacts where these actions occurred. So a lot of the things that you all were talking about with, what power of place means, it has such a connection to the archaeological record, because these are objects that were left and have been untouched for 200 years. So they have a lot of personal stories to tell and a lot of history to tell as well. So with all this, there's of course there's history that happened, before the 1820s, after the 1820s, and we're interested in all of it, because when you dig in the ground, there's no message that's scribed in lead that says, the post hole you just uncovered dates to 1720 or it's 1820. You've got to figure it out from the context and what's found around it. And one thing that is really amazing about Montpelier is the degree of preservation that we've got on the landscape. And this really gets into like 3 main periods of history of Montpelier, like for leading towards the development of the archaeological record, but then after the preservation. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go over in a thumbnail sketch the history of Montpelier from the arrival of enslaved Africans at Montpelier all the way up into the present day and what we're doing with the restoration. So this 300-year history can be broken into about 3 different periods. The first is the time period when the Madisons owned the land, and there were over, all told, close to about 300 enslaved individuals through time working and living at Montpelier. We just had there was an incredible generation of sites. It just made for a massive buildup of that archaeological inventory on the landscape. And after Dolly sells the property in 1844, that's where you go from more site formation to more preservation of the sites. And so in the first phase of this, 1844 to 1901, except for the Civil War period that I'll talk about all these in detail in a second, but from 1844 to 1901, you go from, at any one time, close to or over 100 individuals living at Montpelier down to about 25. It means the land got used a lot less intensively, and there was a lot more overgrowth of areas, and what were working areas then becoming archaeological sites. And when all this really could have been messed up is in the 20th century, like when you have mechanized equipment that can go in, you look at a construction site with a backhoe or the front end loader, and you can wipe out 2 acres in an afternoon. I mean, that's just terrifying to think of, what could have happened at Montpelier, or even plowing. As we'll go into in a second, during the 20th century, basically what happened at Montpelier is the whole place was mothballed, except for areas where the DuPonts had additions made on the house, and then, expansion of their farm complex. But these all happen in areas that are outside of, the sites that were developed in the 18th and early 19th century. So for Montpelier as a whole, where all these sites are situated is in this 2,650 acres. So this map right here, what you can see, the white is the outlines of what's owned by the National Trust for Historic Preservation today. So the DuPonts, Marion DuPont Scott, who is the daughter of William and Annie Zen DuPont, who bought Montpelier in 1901, she inherits the property in the late 20s. And then when she's in her elderly years in the 80s, she gives it all to the National Trust. So all this property belongs to the National Trust. And the visitor core is the center of all this. And if you look at, what was Madison-owned lands during the time period, this is all the area that's in yellow right here. And if you go to the blog, gosh, I think it was back in February, I wrote a blog looking at the various plantations through time at Montpelier. So you can see what's in yellow this at one time was Madison owned lands, which relates to, the Montpelier plantation, but there are other plantations that are in these adjacencies that also are on Montpelier land. So these are all important areas that, have been preserved in the 20th century with, how much land the DuPonts owned, but relate to, not just other plantations, but enslaved communities that would have known and been interacting with the Montpelier enslaved community. And that's where, for today, the descendant community, the Montpelier Descendant Committee isn't just, what's defined in this yellow area or it's what's defined in the white outline. It's all of the connecting plantations, all of the connecting history that connected the people to the land. And with Montpelier, what we've been doing within this area that's outlined by white, though, this white border, is trying to figure out all the sites that are on the area, on the landscape. And of the 2,700 acres, we've got about 1,800 acres of woods. And back in the 18 teens, probably would have been about 400 acres of woods, and the rest would have been pastures, areas that were being plowed, fields that were being left to fallow to recover, for fertilization process. But once the land is sold, a lot of this area returns back to woods. And what we've been doing, and we'll talk about this more over the next week and into next week, into the next couple of weeks as well, is we've been doing metal detector surveys on the property. And I don't know if y'all have gotten into looking at some of the metal detector survey information that we've done. Anybody had a chance to look at any of what's on the website yet, or the field school web pages? If not, I know Chris, it looks like you have, but you'll be getting into this week. But with the metal detector surveys, we've basically been doing all this area that's in green and yellow and red, what looks to be highlighted in these areas. These are areas that we've done 20-meter metal detector survey. And I'll talk about the 20-meter metal detector survey in a little bit when we talk about the home farm, this area right here. But suffice to say, the areas that we've done survey on, we've found lots of sites, and even areas that we haven't done the metal detector survey on in previous years' surveys, we've found all kinds of sites. A lot of the sites that are outside of the metal detector surveys, these areas that are in green and yellow and red, these are all Civil War encampments, these larger sites through here. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But a lot of these other smaller sites that we've located through metal detector surveys, we've surveyed maybe a fifth thoroughly of the Montpelier property through gridded metal detector survey. And so all these areas where you can see the aerial photograph, we have not completed an exhaustive metal detector survey. So there's lots more sites out here to be found. And it's an incredibly rich land for archaeology. And then all these sites provide information on not, the people that were living and working there, but then also the history as it relates to, how we interpret Montpelier. So we've really, we don't even know if I think we've hit some of the best sites, but it's hard to say. What we've done over the past 5 years is intensively surveyed is the visitor core, or what was the plantation core for Montpelier back in the day. But we don't know up in these areas, there could be just some amazing sites that are waiting to be discovered. So this sense of discovery, this period of discovery is still going on at Montpelier. But for getting into the history of what made up these sites, what I want to talk about first is, the first 3 generations of Madison ownership at Montpelier. And this is, starting in the 1720s and going up until Dolly Madison sold the property in 1844. And I'm going to give a pretty cursory overview of these. When you all do the highlights of Montpelier tour next week, you're going to get into a lot more detail on this. But what I wanted to focus on with the power of place, this power of place theme, and also sites of labor, is what kind of labor was happening that could be associated with each of these generations. So have you all looked at the archaeology booklet yet? That one that talks about all the sites at Montpelier? How many of you all have looked at that? I've looked at it. This isn't the right or wrong answer because you got all week to look at this stuff. Just to give you all, so you all have a lot to look at, which is great. Rebecca, looks like you've looked at it. So the Mount Pleasant site is the original site of the original farm location of Montpelier and the original home site for the Madison family. And really the person that was living there in a thumbnail history sketch was Frances Madison, the grandmother of the president. And during her tenure at Montpelier from 1732 up until her death in 1761, what she was having the people that she enslaved at Montpelier do was grow tobacco. So during this time period, a lot of it was clearing the land. So this was girdling trees and then hoeing the soil into hills and then planting tobacco on those hills of topsoil. So there's incredible topsoil erosion with this process, as you can imagine, because with all the trees gone, you lose all the root mass and a lot of the soil erodes away. But there's incredible money to be made with this. And so what we found is pretty much we're almost 100% certain that every inch of the land, except in some of the steeper gullies, was being worked as tobacco plots from the 1720s all the way up until around the time of the American Revolution. And with Frances, running the plantation up until her death in 1761, that meant that and the reason why she does this, and you'll get into this when you do some of the readings in next week, is her husband, the grandfather of James Madison, was poisoned by 2 of their slaves and a neighboring slave. And then she remains unmarried through this entire time. And it's a huge formative process in what becomes Montpelier, because with her running the plantation, what that means is when her son comes of age in 1741, when he's an adult, he is not running the tobacco plantation. He starts to get into other trades with the enslaved community that he owns. So he starts jobbing out slaves as carpenters. He sets up a blacksmith shop, definitely by the 1750s, even earlier than that. This painting down here of Mount Pleasant on the lower left-hand corner, this is what we think Mount Pleasant looked like up until about 1761. And actually what Dennis discovered, and this painting is kind of off scale. This is one we had an artist do like about 15 years ago. But where this tobacco barn is off to behind Mount Pleasant, this is the Frances's dwelling house, slave quarters in this area, the kitchen, and then the Madison family cemetery back here. We've actually found an early blacksmith shop back here that could relate to before James Madison's parents, James Madison Sr. and his wife, Nellie Conway Madison, have the first dwelling built up by the main house. And so what James Madison Sr., this is the father of the president, he has his slaves involved in blacksmithing activities. Also, he's a merchant factor, meaning he imports goods from England and then sells them to the local community. And then he's also, like I said, jobbing out slaves for work to the local farmers in the community. So what would this mean? Like, how is this different in terms of the cash that's coming in from what his mom is doing, Frances Madison, who's basically exporting tobacco to England? What's the difference in the economic base between, selling tobacco overseas and then serving the local community? And it's not a complicated answer. It's just first what comes to mind.
I would say that they get the money a lot quicker. They're not waiting for it to come back from overseas when they got it sold.
Oh my God,
I don't know.
Yeah, Lizzie, absolutely. This is why I ask these questions. I mean, they seem like obvious ones, but they're things that I never thought of that, Lizzie, yeah, they're getting money like James Madison Sr. in marketing to the local community. He would have been getting the money immediately unless he decided to give credit to individuals. But for Frances, her tobacco that she would have had her slaves producing would have ended up embargoed in warehouses, both, first in Fredericksburg where they exported everything, but then also in Lisbon and Bristol, where it was shipped to. So yeah, there's a huge difference. And what the end was is that, you know, with the son marketing to the local community and the grandmother marketing to the global economy, it means they have two different production economies. And when you get to the American Revolution, what this meant was when the tobacco economy crashes, Montpelier is set up to take advantage of this local economy where there's still money at hand, whereas the global economy, things shut down with the revolution. And so many places like Montpelier, plantations go into debt by the third, fourth quarter of the 18th century. And what this results in is the second generation and the third generation is hampered, and the places get divided and sold. And that ends, for in a lot of cases, this would end the trajectory of the enslaved community being in a stable location. So with all this, by the time you get up to the house being built in like 1765, I mean, there's been like 30 years of just incredibly complex economic activity going on. And the main house, you all will see this in the archaeology booklet. The main house wasn't built until 1765, and the house that's circled right here, this was the original dwelling house for James Madison's parents, James Madison Sr. and his wife, Nellie Conway Madison. They had this house built before Nellie comes on the property in 1751, after James Madison, the future president, is born. And we found archaeological evidence for this house. It was a 16 by 20 structure. And so for the first 10 years of their marriage and the first 10 years of Madison's life, this is what he would have known as home. And the evidence for this comes from the archaeology in the South Yard, the South Kitchen, where we found this chimney top and chimney base that was way out of proportion for a kitchen or any kind of outbuilding. And we were able to figure out that this early kitchen was actually the planter's cottage, and we've actually restored it. You'll see this reconstructed when you come to Montpelier. We just finished it over the past year, reconstructing this building. This is what it looked like in 2016, and this is what it looked like last summer when we were rebuilding the building. But for James Madison Sr., and Nellie, his wife, Nellie Conway Madison, once Frances, the grandmother, dies, that's when they begin to have the main house built. So the family seat for Montpelier remains down at Mount Pleasant up until 1761, when Frances dies. And then after that, that's when they arranged to have the large brick mansion that's the core of Montpelier built today. And during this time, what he starts to have his slaves engage in terms of agricultural activities, this is after 1761, is he has his blacksmiths building some of the first plows in the region. And this is when you get a lot of animal husbandry at Montpelier and for the region. And so that what James Madison Sr. has his slaves engaging in is more grain-based agriculture. So the bottoms fell out of the tobacco market. By the time the American Revolution happens, a lot of the land at Montpelier begins to be plowed. And during this time, they're doing what's called directional plowing, which causes incredible erosion. We'll get into more of this when we do the tour of the Eastwoods, because in the Eastwoods, you can literally see the evidence for this on the landscape. It's amazing. It's this wooded area that's been wooded since the 1860s, and the erosional gullies and some of the plow furrowing you can actually see in the landscape. There's a story map called the Eastwoods that's in your reading materials for this week. You'll see some of this going on with that. So for the next generation, James Madison Jr. and his wife Dolly, when they're first married, what they arranged for is this duplex addition to be put on the main house. But this is the time in 1792 when he starts taking over the operation of the plantation. And in 1792, there's a series of letters from the overseers between James Madison Jr. and the overseers, where Madison is reorganizing the plantation. And what he's really trying to do is make Montpelier into more of a scientific farm, where they're having the plowing occur on a contour basis to prevent erosion, also manuring of the fields, rotating crops, using animal manure in the fields for fertilizing. So he tries to make it into a scientific farm, but what he and this is when the home farm, the area we're working on this month, really gets developed. There's almost, while you have Mount Pleasant, which is the early 18th century, the mid 18th century site, despite Mount Pleasant being out there, almost all the sites we found at the home farm, and I'll get into this in a second, all date to the 18 teens, 1820s. So this is squarely on the time period where James Madison Jr. has taken over the operation of the plantation. But throughout this period, from the 1790s, maybe the 18 teens, he returns some profits from crops. But by the time you get to the retirement period, this is 1817 to 1844. This is when the wings are added onto the house. The whole landscape around the house has changed from, this Georgian landscape design with the buildings up front, and then over where the temple is where the blacksmith shop was located. In the mid 18 teens, all this landscape in the house is transformed into this neoclassical landscape with both neoclassical architecture for the main house, but also making this whole area into a set of basically pleasure grounds around the estate. So what was a blacksmith shop in the 18th century is transformed into a temple with this winding carriage road that comes up to the front of the house. These work buildings that were out front are removed and everything gets shoehorned either into the south yard or all the way out to the home farm where we're working over the next month. And what the Madisons try to do with this is they're trying to basically, they know visitors are going to come, and these aren't, yeoman farmers or people without resources. These are like the elite of America. Like when Marquis de Lafayette visits in 1825, he visits Montpelier twice. When the Monroes, the Carters, the Lees come through, they're all staying at Montpelier. And what they want to do is entertain folks, not just to be hospitable, but they're also getting loans from these people. This is where their lines of credit is coming from. So their entertaining corresponds with all the lines of credit they're getting from these visitors. And but in what they're hoping to do after Madison dies is that they're writing up all these the notes on the Constitution that Madison had recorded during the Constitutional Convention in 1787. They're hoping that they're going to make over $100,000 on these notes. They end up making $30,000, and this is where they really go to what wasn't Plan B. It was Plan A the entire time. Is selling the people, the enslaved community at Montpelier, to make up for the debts. And why, some people talk about, the selling of the slaves at Montpelier is just kind of a last minute decision. Well, Madison never had a plan for freeing the slaves, the enslaved community at Montpelier. It was never written out. It was never specified. Throughout the retirement years, we're finding evidence that, and Madison writes about this, about his nieces and nephews, that Montpelier basically turns into a breeding plantation where they're trying to create a situation, a home life where people are reproducing, and that there's basically credit built up in the people because, as individuals, they can rapidly be sold to the deep south, to the Cotton Kingdom for cash. To have the slaves be available to be turned into liquid assets to pay off debts. And this is almost immediately what happens. As soon as Mr. Madison is in the grave in 1836, what Dolly starts to do is sell off the enslaved community. And by the time she sells Montpelier in 1844, there's something like 40 of the 120 individuals left. And probably a lot of those are individuals that had a personal connection to her, like her personal enslaved maidservants, who she said in her letter that she wanted to sell them, but she couldn't afford to buy someone who knew all of the things that she needed to have information on to have her household function. So, it is basically these retirement years are ones that we want to find out by looking at these sites of labor, what was happening at Montpelier. You know, the whole, we talk about the field quarters down below the visitor center, the log cabins we have down there as being field slave quarters. It's becoming more and more apparently that they're not. They're probably individuals living at those cabins, and I'll get into this in a second, where that are skilled individuals that are tying back to some of these activities. So the ground is really revealing so much of this. So when the property sold in 1844, what happens to all of the, you know, the enslaved individuals is they're sold. And so you've got a plantation that's set up to house and have working spaces for over 100 individuals. It goes down to about 25 individuals. So all these spaces are basically no longer useful once Dolly sells the land. And almost all the buildings, everything that you go from what's south of the main house all the way down to where the visitor center is, you know, south is down in this 3D rendering of the landscape. All these buildings are either intentionally taken down or left to decay in place. And within the historic core, what you've got is just this incredibly well-preserved landscape where you dig down through about 4 inches of topsoil, and you're at that abandoned 1840s surface and in these 1820s yard deposits, whether it's a slave quarter or a work area. So just some incredible sites to look at. And before getting into all that, you know, some of the details we found for the retirement years, what I wanted to do was run us all the way up until the present day of what's happened in Montpelier, because this is really important for both the preservation of the landscape, but then how we're doing the research. So in 1848, the next owner, what they do is, you know, they've got probably about 20 enslaved individuals at Montpelier. This is the Thornton family. What they end up doing is taking the historic farm complex that's in this area right here. So to give you some bearings on this map, the red line is the outlines for Montpelier today. What's in pink is the Madison-owned lands. And then the main house is here. Visitor center is right here. And I didn't show you all this, but where Arlington House is right over here. So this, like when you all come in the morning, you all are going to be coming down the driveway hey, Nathaniel, how are you doing?
I'm so sorry I'm late. I got my days confused. I'm sorry.
Okay, we've recorded this, and so you can catch up on the first hour, or actually hour and 50 minutes. Holy cow, the time's flying. So, but we got this recorded. Let me make sure this is recording. Well, I know we get the first hour recorded. I will check, just make sure that this has been recorded. Shoot. But anyways, where the home farm is today, in 1848, all this area was abandoned, and there was a new farm complex built to the north of all these Madison lands. And so basically what you've got by 1850 is there's a whole new farm complex built to the north of where it was intensive Madison occupation. And what resulted in this is all this area remains untouched throughout the 19th century. And this area becomes the area that's developed in the 19th and in the 20th century. So this is incredibly important. This is the area where the archaeology lab is today, and the main facilities complex is for Montpelier today. And the only real time period during this mid to late 19th century time period where you get site formation is during the Civil War. And during the Civil War, this is where you have about 8 different regimental camps at Montpelier. This is between the Battle of Gettysburg and the Battle of Wilderness. And so you've got summer encampments at Montpelier that we found out in the woods, and these are filled with these just massive deposits of abandoned knapsacks, bullets, probably more bivouac style tents that are occupied by maybe for a week at a time. And then the other sets of sites we've got are these winter encampments that were occupied from January of 1864 through May of 1864. And this is the area where in a couple of weeks, Chris will give you all a walking tour of not only these encampments here, where we've reconstructed some of the huts, both with reenactors, but also through these one-week log cabin programs that we run. But we've used these Civil War encampments to talk about, some of the post-Madison history of Montpelier, and also some of the legacy of the Constitution, with, the Civil War being the end of slavery, and then this bringing in the next time period, which is, for the Freedmen's period for Montpelier. And this is where, over on the same part of the property, we've got the site number 20 right here. That's the Gilmore Farm. And the Gilmore Farm is this log cabin that was built in the 1870s and was occupied up until 1920 when the DuPonts bought the Gilmore property. But with these sites, what we've got is, up through the early 20th century, is we've got, examples of post-emancipation sites for former enslaved families that make farms at Montpelier. And so we're really able to follow, this history of African-American sites into the late 19th century. And where a lot of this changes radically is in 1901, when the DuPonts buy the property. In 1901, this is when, all the acreage that had been sold through the years from 1844 up until 1901 became purchased back under one property by William DuPont and Annie Zen DuPont, his wife. But what they turned Montpelier into is, first they enlarged the house. They turned it in, basically from its appearance from the 1820s, they basically double the size of the house. So you can see the back colonnade right here gets sucked into all these additions that they make. But what's amazing is, this is where you have the most disturbance at Montpelier, is where the additions go in the main house. The other area is where the old 1850s farm complex, they continue to expand that in the 20th century. So all the development at Montpelier occurs to the north of where all the Madison era sites are, and all those get basically left untouched. So this farm complex continues to be built on by the DuPonts in the early 20th century. And all during this time period, the DuPonts, they didn't buy Montpelier to make money off the land. The Madisons bought Montpelier not because they thought it was pretty or was a nice location. They bought it because they were able to figure out it was some of the richest agricultural land in Virginia. And then they bought slaves to work the land. The DuPonts, they made their money up in Delaware with, the chemical companies they had. So they're using Montpelier as a country estate. And all during the time period where a lot of older Virginia farmland that's abandoned up to the Civil War, from the Civil War on, starts to be plowed with tractor-based plowing, where you can start plowing an eroded piece of land, go down another 4 or 5 inches, and you're in much better soil that you can grow crops on. None of this happened at Montpelier. So if Montpelier had been sold to anybody else, I don't know what would have been left of it. With the DuPonts owning it all the way up until 1984, we just have this incredible preservation. And some of the sites that are at Montpelier that really allow us to tell this larger story, and you all see some of these. One of the ones I think is the most important site at Montpelier is this train station that we've restored today as a segregation era train station with a colored and a white entrance. And this train station that was built in 1911, it's one where we're really able to look at the period of Jim Crow and how this impacted, the trajectory of African-American citizenship. And with all these sites, up to the 20th century, what we've been looking at is ways to tell the story of the Constitution. So not just, talk about Virginia, Montpelier is another Virginia plantation, but talk about it, how it relates to, the guy that owned it, James Madison, and his legacy with the Constitution. And I'll get into this in 1 second. One thing that has really defined this story is, what we found archaeologically of the African-American story at Montpelier, from the 1720s all the way into the early 20th century. But more importantly, working with the descendant community at Montpelier. And that's where really all this story comes together. Everything from, when you go into the train station, we've got recorded narratives of members of the descendant community who remember as children taking the train from the Montpelier train station and entering into the colored waiting room rather than the white waiting room based on their skin color, and this being based on state law that mandated this happen. So with all this, what we've really focused on with the archaeology is making all this landscape reflect the daily lives of the people that made this space, not just own the space. And getting into some of the restoration work that we did, after 2002 is when we begin really to focus on the 1820s. This is when we get a gift from the Mellon family to tear down all the DuPont additions. And if that sounds bizarre, it is the Mellon family paying for removing all the DuPont additions. We had to go through this incredible process where we made sure that the DuPont family was okay with their additions being taken down. The Mellon family insisted on this. And then also we did this it was a 6-year investigation to make sure that we could actually restore the house accurately. So we went through this really intensive restoration process where we removed the additions, the later post-Madison additions, brick by brick and stick by stick. And what we discovered is that, like the landscape, so much of the original core of the main house was still there. It had just been moved around, and we were able to reassemble it. Before you all do the main house tour, I'll make sure you all have access to, we got a grant from the Institute for Museum Library Sciences to document the restoration work we did. And it's all in a 3D model in GIS. So you can, we're just beginning to put all this information into this model from the restoration, because up until now it's been in, digital storage, and we're being able to get into this. But this restoration that we did of the main house was absolutely critical for us, going from the physical evidence that was at Montpelier to tell the story, to go from the physical evidence, not just to tell the story, but also to restore the landscape back to its earlier appearance. So in the same way we use the physical evidence to restore the main house, we began to use the physical evidence of the landscape to restore the 1820s landscape. And one of the first sites we did this at was the front lawn. And again, this booklet gets into the details of it, but suffice to say, what we found was evidence for, this watercolor that showed this fence being out front. And then we found all these post holes that lined up with this watercolor that allowed us to place the fence on the landscape. And then we're able to figure out how in the 1840s, when this fence was taken down and the carriage road was brought up to the front of the house, this whole area was buried under about 2 feet of clay fill. And the actual last set of wagon ruts were still in place from the 1840s that were buried by this clay fill. So we're able to, what I think was really cool about this front landscape, investigation and then restoration, is some of the most ephemeral parts of the landscape, like wagon ruts, were used to restore, not only help us figure out where the roads were, but also gave guidance to how this formal landscape worked around the main house. So, these wagon ruts might have been carriages, but a lot of them were agricultural wagons taking goods from one side of the property to the other. So we're literally using, the footsteps of the ancestors and the wagon ruts that were formed by their labor to restore this space. So what we did by 2008 is we took all this information, made some conjectural interpretations on what it was, and then actually restored this landscape back to what makes up Montpelier today, but also did it in such a way that could be reversed. So we buried all this archaeology under another foot of clay, so that if we ever wanted to come back and look at the archaeology, because we only did maybe excavated a third of the archaeological record that was there, and then left the rest for the future. And you'll see it's a little bit different than what we did in the South Yard. But for this space, we wanted to basically get the shell of the historic formal grounds represented in relation to the main house. And what this gave us a sense of, this roadway and the fence, was just how large the formal grounds were around the main house. So basically running from what's called the Boxwood Grotto, all the way over to the temple. This is this red shingled structure that Chris was talking about, what he wrote his thesis on. You've got this fence that runs along here. And then in front of the main house, you've got this planted area of trees that when visitors were coming up to the front of the house, directed the eye to the main house. But behind this, you've got working areas here for the south yard, and then also the north kitchen in this area. But this defining boundary also marks another contrast between a major trash deposit we found here at Dolly's Midden. This is the dining room trash deposit where members of the enslaved community would take any broken items from the dining room table and take them all the way to the edge of the formal grounds and then throw them over this fence into this downslope area. So in this is where we're located, all these imported wares like French porcelains, these transfer prints, the bamboo and peony pattern transfer print that you'll learn more about this, over the next month. But this trash deposit, what it showed was that, the formal area extended all the way to the edge of the grounds right here. And then that's where you have this trash deposit. I mean, they're not going to throw the trash in the middle of the pine alley, which visitors talk about strolling down to see the temple. So, and we'll get into this. I think it's day 4 of this week, we're going to be looking at artifact distributions. We'll get into more of this, of how, these trash distributions that we find from the archaeology, how we find trash distributed in shovel test pits and units, how it relates to the physical landscape, and then how it allows us to interpret, these different time periods. So for this, the other parts of the formal grounds, the back lawn, we did excavations back in with the restoration and figured out there was this massive leveling campaign that not only resulted in the back lawn being built, but also the terracing in the garden being created. This massive terraced area that wasn't built by DuPont workers with mechanized equipment, but was built some 80 years earlier when the wings are added onto the house. So there's just these massive landscape changes that occur around the main house. And then this fence line runs all the way back to form this set of formal grounds. But then in the middle of this set of formal grounds is the quarters for house slaves and these working areas that related to the entertaining that the Madisons were doing. And so when you all do the South Yard tour, you'll get into more of this. But as a quick overview of the South Yard excavations, we knew about the South Yard from an insurance map. And when we finished the restoration of the main house in 2007, this is when we had discussions with the descendant community where they really emphasized to us the disproportionality of representation of people on the landscape, with the main house being restored and the South Yard not being restored. Black people were not present on the landscape. And this is where we made the decision to spend the next 6 years looking for evidence for the South Yard, looking for money to restoring the South Yard. And we began in 2011 with outlining the buildings with these timber frame outlines, and then doing archaeology in this space to really uncover enough information where that if we ever got money to restore the South Yard, we could do it immediately. And so the first areas we excavated in the South Yard were these 2 duplex additions. And the importance of this, Terry will get in with you about the archaeological significance of this, but for the importance of this politically, is we're able to establish with these buildings and the archaeological evidence in the South Yard that it was absolutely possible to do the same degree of accurate restoration in areas where slaves were living and working as we did with the main house. And that was absolutely critical for, directing the president's office, the development office, to begin to look for projects and money to restore this space. And what kind of the fantasy with this space is having these timber frame outlines is first, before we had these, people would look at this area where there was, these DuPont tree specimens, the Spanish fir and the Nordman fir, and they wouldn't ask questions about slave quarters. They'd ask questions about what the trees were and how do you manage the grass. Once we built these timber frames, everybody asked questions like, is this the area where the slave quarters were? And we'd be like, hallelujah, yeah, you get it. This is where, we'd be able to talk about the enslaved community's lives. And the fantasy is that one day somebody would be up on the terrace asking about the slave quarters, and they would say, why in the world do you represent the slave quarters as what look to be bird cages? Why not restore them? And we'd start talking about how restoration grade architecture is $500 a square foot, because to have an 8x10 oak beam, you don't go to Lowe's to buy that. You got to chop down the trees, and then, you got to pay carpenters not just a living wage, but $35 an hour to do this work. And then there's all the archaeology. Well, long and short of it, David Rubenstein visited in 2013. And if you don't know who David Rubenstein is, anybody ever heard of David Rubenstein? He was made his money by merging corporations in the 80s. He's a multi-billionaire now. He's heads up this group called Patriotic Philanthropy. He gave us $10 million to not only restore the South Yard and do the archaeology on it, but furnish the main house. And then we also used this money for creating an exhibit that tied it all together. And you all are going to be touring this exhibit next week. It's one of the first things that you all are going to be doing. But for the South Yard, what we ended up doing was going from, talking to visitors using these 3D models to actually doing the archaeology in all this space. So in 2015, that's when we excavated the smokehouses, and we found this massive set of trash deposits in this lower area that related to the south, these duplexes. So here's the smokehouses. Here's in 2011, we excavated these 2 duplexes. Then in 2015, we excavated the smokehouses. And it was during this year that we really involved the descendants in an organized way with these 1-week excavations. And all of a sudden, we started to really prime our interpretation for doing this work. And I'll get into that in 1 second. The next year, we excavated where we figured out what wasn't a kitchen, but this early planter's cottage that was the main house from 1750 up until 1765. And we found this other 18th century building out here. And then in this year, that 2016, we held more descendant workshops and archaeological excavations. And then in 2017, this is when we really began to develop the exhibit, but then also excavate more areas, the fence line, some of the southwest portions of the yards. So we did about 8 years of archaeology in this space to get it to the point where we could not only restore it, but then really refine our stories. And this is where, working with the descendant community, we co-created an exhibit called Mere Distinction of Color. And then in this exhibit, what we've done is we've combined the story of the enslaved community at Montpelier and their lives with the history of race and how it combines with slavery and the Constitution to really contextualize the ancestors' homes in the South Yard and to make it so this space, which, descendants were really concerned with these buildings looking so refined, is that visitors would walk away thinking that, slaves weren't living in such a bad, physical location or situation. Was slavery that bad? And what we wanted to do is contextualize that it wasn't about living conditions. It wasn't necessarily even about the labor. It was, being owned by another, set of people who weren't just wealthy, but had this incredible political, social, and economic power that allowed, a whole group of people based on race to be made into this different caste system. And so this is where the exhibit gets into, where money comes into this and how it's steeped in the Constitution protecting the economy and how that protected slavery. So one of the things that we looked at in all these discussions with the community is really, how to round out the picture of the enslaved community at Montpelier. Just looking at house slaves, you couldn't really tell the whole story of who was at Montpelier. And this is where the descendant community asked us to move the same rapid way we did with the South Yard, start looking at sites of labor, where people, people today think about labor happening. I mean, there's a lot of labor that happened in the South Yard for serving, the hundreds of guests that came to visit the Madisons. But when visitors today think about labor at a plantation, they think about the farming operations of it, where the wealth came from. And this is where, we moved from the main house area out to this area where the visitor center overlooked what is a field today. And in this field, back in 2010, we found what we thought were quarters for field slaves. But over the past 5 years, what we've done with Dennis and our metal detector surveys is really begin to define all the sites that are in this area. And what we found is, suffice to say in a nutshell, like over 24 buildings, and have been able to figure out this was the main farm complex back in the period of the 1820s. And so many of these sites, how we've been able to figure out the slave quarters was through traditional archaeology, shovel test pits and units, because there's all these domestic items that were found here. For a lot of these other sites, these were almost completely invisible to shovel test pits and standard archaeological testing. What we used to find these was metal detector surveys. And what do you all, I'm glad that you all most of you haven't looked at the material, because I get to ask these questions fresh. If these sites were abandoned, if these buildings, were abandoned in 1844, what would you find at these sites that would be picked up by a metal detector? And Carissa, you can't answer this because you already know the answer. Yeah, Nathaniel.
Nails.
Nails. And Nathaniel, do you go by Nate or
Nathaniel, please?
Nathaniel. Okay, I got you. And Nathaniel, we'll have you introduce yourselves when Terry and Mary get back on the line. So, but because we did introductions earlier. But yeah, nails. Nails are like you are going to learn everything about nails over the next month. Nails are what metal detectorists call Montpelier gold, because they're how we locate all these sites, especially these very ephemeral sites, these sites of labor. So like I said, this is a little bit better map of the metal detector survey we've done at Montpelier. All the areas in green and red, we've done metal detector survey on a 20-meter interval. And with the metal detector surveys on the 20-meter interval, we basically scan all of these, each of these little squares is like 66 feet by 60 feet, 66 square feet, which is about 1/10 of an acre. That's the size of my yard here in Orange. So they're small areas compared to the rest of the property, but they're pretty big and allows us to scan an area pretty quickly. But we find where every last, concentration of nails, meaning like 2 or more nails, are in these areas. And then we begin to map them. And when you look at what we do to understand whether we've got 20th century trash that's thrown out there, which the DuPonts unfortunately had their laborers throw a lot of trash out in the woods back in the day. This is before the days of landfills, when all the junk would be just moved out into a gully in the woods and deposited. What we do with these metal detector surveys is, after scanning the grid, then we go back and sample to understand what the time period of artifacts we're dealing with. And 9 times out of 10, or 99 times out of 100, when you're looking at 18th or 19th century sites, it's the nails that we locate. And these nails, what they allow us to do is date these sites to within about a 20-year occupation, which is absolutely fantastic. Mary will get into some of this nail dating that we use, but basically each changing of the nails actually represents a changing of the guard with Madison ownership. So from the 1720s up until 1796, this is Francis Madison running the plantation, and then the parents, James Madison Sr. and Nellie Conway Madison. When you get 1797 to 1807, this is when James Madison Jr. is trying to make Montpelier into a scientific farm, and he rebuilds all the farm complex that we're going to be excavating over the next month. And then 1808 to 1848, there's a whole different kind of nail that's manufactured, machine cut side pinched. And this is the retirement years where, there's a lot more, accumulating of capital through the bodies of the enslaved community, through looking to sell the slaves. And then finally, the post-Madison period is where we get into these face pinched nails. And then what is absolutely crazy about the site we're working on, you're going to see this next week, is we're finding a lot of these face pinch nails at the blacksmith shop. And it's just blowing our mind because all the rest of the farm complex dates to before 1848. So there's something going on with the blacksmith shop that might relate to the overseer's house, and that it might be, have some post-Madison occupation. So applying this to the home farm, literally zooming into the site we're going to be working on. For the home farm, we've got an area that we have done not only intensive 20-meter survey on, but we've begun to hone in on what's called 10-foot metal detector survey. So the 20-meter survey allows us to find the sites. So with the 20-meter survey, each of these is like a 66-foot by 66-foot square. And this allows us to see where these red areas are, where the sites are. Once we get that done, we're able to look at the dates of the nails, we're able to figure out the time occupation. But then what we do is we go from the 20-meter survey down to a 10-foot grid. And with a 10-foot grid, all of a sudden your resolution becomes that much better. It's like going from, a 1980s computer to a computer today where you've got a lot more pixels involved in the picture. And what you can, with these 10-foot surveys, not only do you see where the sites are, but you can actually begin to pick out where the buildings are located. So again, this is from green to red in terms of the number of metallic artifacts that are found. The areas that are in orange and red are where these buildings are. So, and it's all in relationship to each other. So like here at the overseer's house, this is where the overseer's house is located, where we opened up units last year and actually found it. For getting into the GIS maps for what we've recently done, I'm going to switch screens to actually the live GIS map. And this is the same map. Here's the visitor center, the parking lots. The overseer's house is right here. This is where the slave quarters are reconstructed are located right here. And then this is the site we're going to be opening up units on over the next month. The blacksmith shop, we've actually already excavated all these units that are in different colors right here. This is this major concentration of slag and clipped iron we found. But then what Dennis just recently found is 2 more sites. Up here you've got areas where you've got over 100 hits. Down here, these are in the area of the neighborhood of 75 hits per 10-foot square. This one is the same way, but these have very little in the way of slag and clipped nails. It's all just, or clipped iron, it's all just nails. So if you look at the blacksmith hits here, you can see, each one of these dots represents something that we've sampled, and you can actually see what we found in these excavations. Like up in here, there's just, like a bonanza of blacksmith material. These are these pieces of clipped iron right here, horseshoe nails that have been removed from a used horseshoe. But then when you get over to down in this area, it's pretty much all burnt nails. So we're thinking these 2 sites down here are potential storage buildings. We don't know. That's why we're doing the excavations. Y'all are going to find out over the next month. So with all this, what I'll do, I will, so you all can look at this. Oops. I will share this link. I'm pretty sure that this one is in the in some of the website we've got going on here. Let me see. Copy. I'm going to copy this, and there it is. Here's the link. Oh, Chris is not in the meeting. Everybody. There we go. That was the problem. This is the link to that GIS map, so you can explore some of that. But that's the one. I'm actually going to be updating it tonight with the latest set of data that Dennis collected with the iPad. But getting back to the presentation here, let's see. Too many windows open. I should have closed some of the windows beforehand. Yeah, so from these metal detector surveys, this is where we're basically testing out what we think we've got out at the home farm. And this is what this next month is going to be really, we're going from what is a blacksmith site to a site that has like 2 different components to it with these metal detector surveys. And what we want to do is see whether the 3D imagery, this 3D map that we've made that's conjectural based on the 20-meter survey, is actually what we think it is. I think, you know, obviously with the 10-foot surveys and the units, we're going to need to redo this entire map. Some of the sites we've found and we've excavated, the threshing barn, we know where that is. These 3 slave quarters we found this through the archaeology, but the stable, the wagon house, the shed, the blacksmith site, this farrier site down here. The farrier site is where you all are going to be doing shovel test pits, rotating in and out of that as 3 different groups. But this is going to be, you know, your all's home for the next month in terms of your thoughts, your dreams. I mean, you're going to be dreaming about the flags that are out there, about the nails you're finding. What I'm so excited about, we're so excited about with this field school is it's, you know, one of the first field schools we've done looking at these sites of labor. And, you know, with the number of units that we're going to have open, the number of shovel test pits that we're going to be digging, what you all are going to be able to see is like how the work you're doing is refining our understanding of this area. And then again, what's just so doggone cool about this area is this is the spot where people park their car. You know, people are closer when they park their car to this farm complex than they are to the main house. So the future of this area, this is the frontier of Montpelier in terms of the next frontier, in terms of really broadening our interpretation to look at not just, you know, the kind of labor that enslaved individuals were working and doing, but also making that labor tangible. And when you think about, you know, the end product of that, you know, what could be down the line for this is, well, Madison's nieces and nephews burned all the papers that showed what kind of labor the enslaved community was involved in. These sites bear witness to that. So if you were looking at something like reparations and looking at, you know, showing, well, how do you know that Madison had slaves working at Montpelier? Well, you've got these sites. The archaeology doesn't lie. And even better than that is over the past year, Terry and Mary and I have been, with the cutbacks with COVID, we've been giving tours to visitors. And so like to give a tour to people where you've got like 2 people with MAGA hats, you've got another 3 people that are obviously there because they know a lot about plantation history, and then another 5 people who don't care either way. Talking about things you find in the ground is such an incredible safe space to have a level platform with all those people. And then by the time we finish it and get to the cemetery, you've got people who are, you know, have an empathy for, you know, an empathy for the community that's here and want to advocate for telling whole truth history. So all this, you know, what you all are finding this next month is going to just continue that story. We're just beginning to scratch the surface here. So it's, I'm going to stop sharing screens here. And I don't know how long I've gone, but sorry I've talked so much, but it's, we've got a really exciting month ahead of us. And there's, you know, for these sites, it does, you know, thinking, when you all were thinking about coming to James Madison Home, a plantation, and, you know, for the field school, and you think about Montpelier and what you thought Montpelier would be versus what we're going to be excavating, does this comport, or is it totally different? Is it the same? You know, how does this, you know, just this beginning, you know, blush of, you know, of what we're going to be doing? What is it? What's your reaction to it? And this is like off the cuff. You don't think about it. Just like say, you know, be vulnerable. Yeah, Emily.
I think it's a lot more impressive than I was expecting it to be. Like there's a lot more buildings than I thought were on an average plantation.
So yeah, there's a lot more than meets the eye. Yeah, and that's what we hope to do. Yeah, that's, you know, people ask me, hey, you know, working at 20 years at Montpelier, what's the most exciting find you've made? And they're expecting an artifact. I say the home farm, because this is mind-blowing. So yeah, it's impressive and the amount of labor And, you know, the sacrifice is impressive as well. So impressive is a good word for all this.
There's a lot more that hasn't been excavated yet, but has basically been discovered than I was expecting. Wasn't expecting this much. I've already been metal detected. So it was pretty cool to me.
Yeah, and what's cool is that we, like, Dennis hasn't even, like, if you go well, you can see the map, the 10-foot survey. Like, Dennis hasn't even explored, he's explored maybe a third of the home farm. So this next month, he's going to be looking at the area that's up closer to the parking lot, and to see, you know, that map link I sent you, as he metal detects areas, every 2 weeks he turns in the iPad and I download it and bring it into GIS. You're going to be able to see over the next month, you know, more areas popping up. So definitely check that map tomorrow by noon, because there'll be a whole nother area that he's mapped in. And then, Lizzie, you get to the whole property. I mean, we've only surveyed like generously a third of the property. So it's metal. I love metal detector surveys so much. It's so cool. What other reactions do you all have?
So for me, I'm actually, I'm glad you gave this overview, because, and especially like detailed pictures of the landscape, because I'm actually seeing a lot of correlations between the way, you know, the layouts, Gus, I'm sorry, the layouts of the Montpelier landscape, and, you know, some in the Caribbean, especially with, you know, kind of tree-lined spaces. You've got like a grove. I mean, and even like the, you know, presence of the you know, the garden, the formal garden directly behind the main residence. It's really quite interesting. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Oh, and I actually had a question.
Yeah.
You know, during your metal detectoring, are you finding any sort of kind of features or, you know, deposits near like water sources?
Yeah, that there's a spring that there is a slight concentration there. There's a spring that shows up on the 1908 map, and it's still like a declivity there in the landscape today. But we had found a lot of sites related to water movement on the property, and it's something that's a whole, you know, other line of, you know, research that we want to do. And what you mentioned about the parallels between, you know, plantations in the Caribbean, where, you know, the scale, as you know, was huge. I mean, here a plantation of 100 is massive on the East Coast and the American South, but in the Caribbean, that is a middling plantation. You're talking plantations that 100 enslaved individuals on the Virginia plantation would be the top like 2%, you know, in terms of sizes. When you're in the Caribbean, you're talking, like in Jamaica at the time period, you're talking 800 to 900 enslaved individuals. And yeah, the model for the plantations that are in Virginia came from Barbados and the Caribbean. And if y'all are interested, I'll send you all a link for a paper I wrote looking at its archaeologies of the Atlantic African world, comparing Jamaican plantations, you know, to Montpelier, and from my own dissertation research. So
Yes, please. I'd be in that.
Sure, I'll send that along to everybody. So that was not in the reading list, but I'll go ahead and add it. So it's an optional one that you can read if you're up late at night and you can't sleep. So what other reactions do y'all have to, you know, what I've talked about, what we're doing, and what you expected?
I think getting like the overview just kind of made me more excited to start working and seeing what we'll find. I also have a few questions, if that's okay.
Yeah.
What do you mean by clipped iron?
Oh, clipped iron. This is with blacksmithing. you would heat the iron to, in the forge to it being red hot. And then you take either a cold chisel or your anvil, you place it on the anvil and then cut it with the cold chisel, because you're going to use a cold chisel, not a hot one, because you wouldn't be able to hold it. That's why it's called cold chiseling. And the scraps of iron are the pieces that are taken off. Like if there is, we found an example of this. It's a hoe where there are pieces that are cut out of the hoe and then the remains are thrown away. So that's what clipped iron is these pieces that were too small to do anything with, that they clipped off the larger piece and then work the other piece into a hinge, but then this clipped iron just gets thrown away. So we've basically got a whole field of clipped iron. And what's really cool about it is we don't find that much bar iron, which seems to show that, our initial interpretation of this is that they're doing a lot more repairs of items than buying new iron, like we find at the blacksmith shop up by the temple, where we found a lot of barn iron. And they're buying, pigs of iron, and then would work that into new tools or new items. So started to get way off on a tangent there with clipped iron, so I'll stop. So did you have more questions, Alicia?
Yeah.
Alicia, did you say your name Alicia or Alicia?
Alicia, you're saying
Alicia,
it right.
okay, very cool.
Yep. And my other question was, what were James Madison and Dolly like cultivating on the farm? Was it the grains as well?
From the records and what we're finding through archaeology, it was the enslaved community at that point was, growing tobacco, grains. There was, of course, foodstuffs, corn. It was everything. And there's so our historian has been able to find, traces, mentions of some of this from visitors' accounts, which has been a huge help. So. Cool. Well, anybody else have a reaction, what they expected and what we're doing? Cool. Well, what we'll do is we have been going for what time is it here? It's like 2:40 for like two and a half hours at least. So why don't we take would a 5-minute break be too short, and then come back at 2:45, or does anybody need a longer break? 2:45, is that good Eastern time to reconvene? Thumbs up. Okay, cool. I'll text Terry and Mary and tell them to hop on the line. So, and yeah, take a break. You can leave your camera on or off. You can let your pets take over the Zoom. And I'm gonna yeah. Yeah, back to recording now. But yeah, Nathaniel was able to make it, which is great. He get his days mixed up, but Nathaniel, we've got it all recorded. It's you'll be able to hear everybody's introduction. But if you could introduce yourself, where you're from, your interests, and then also with going with the power of place, describe a place that has meaning to you. You know, either a family home, your car, your boat with your favorite pet, whatever has the most, whatever place that has meaning to you. So.
Okay. Well, I'm Nathaniel. I just graduated from Appalachian. I live in New Bern, North Carolina, and a place, it would be, my parents own a bunch of woods, and we've kind of turned it into a wildlife refuge. It's about 50 acres, and we're trying to get an easement on it, you know, protective easement. And I go out there every day. Important.
Where is that, Nathaniel?
I'm sorry. Oh, Eastern North Carolina. I'm in New Bern.
Oh yeah. Okay. Very cool. Neat. Well, what we wanted to do with this is similar to what we're going to be doing every day at 3 o'clock, is just do a check-in with you all to see if you have any questions. I know I'm not sure how many of you all have had a chance to log into the onto the website. Who's had a chance to even to register on the website and then begin to do some of the courses? I've done a couple of them. So awesome, you all have that. Good deal. And has anybody had any problems with going through the syllabus and through the online portions of it? Does it make sense? Well, Mary and I were talking about this earlier. There is a ton of readings and videos, and there's more than you could possibly do in a week. And so this has been gathered together for you as a resource. And so there's follow the directions in terms of, like, there's areas that Mary said, hey, don't watch every one of these videos, please, unless you're an insomniac and you need something to fill those hours that you cannot sleep. But if you can sleep, sleep. And let me close the door because sorry, I have a multi-Zoom household here. I could hear the floor being banged on upstairs. But yeah, you all have a whole month to learn and go through a lot of the materials that are in the on the syllabus. Basically, we want to have the questions are designed to get into what the most important parts of the information that's on the web page, on the videos, on the readings that we want you to be familiar with. And really, it's this week is designed for you to do probably a lot more reading than most field school students would be able to do, because by the time you get, this is the first year you've done this virtual part of the field school. And normally field school students are either cramming the readings in before they arrive, or they're trying to do it after they arrive, and you've been working for 8 hours in the sun and you get back to Arlington House and you want to pass out. So this is a nice way where you can be sipping your coffee and not be covered in dirt and do the readings. So don't beat yourself up if you're not able to read every last word or memorize it, or watch every last video. And on the pages, there's the web page that has the information, and then there's the materials page tab that you can go to, and that'll either that a lot of those will say required readings and suggested readings. And obviously do the required readings, but for the suggested readings, do those if you have time, but if you don't sweat it.
I would say a lot of the things that I know that I put in as suggested readings or whatever are really just really great references to have on hand. And I would, a lot of this stuff too is going to make a lot more sense once you're here and once you're doing the excavations or doing the lab processes. So this is all really designed to give you guys a foundation, so that the terms and the ideas aren't brand new when you're being asked to kind of execute them. So when we say we're going to excavate a unit stratigraphically, that's not the first time you've heard those words before. And what's really exciting about this group of students that you all represent is in field schools past, we've had people between their freshman and sophomore year that maybe have only taken intro or not even yet. And you all have a really nice education. Everyone's either recent grads or later on in school in a way that I think you're uniquely prepared beyond any field school we've had before. So if a lot of this stuff feels old hat or familiar to you, great, it should. That's really exciting. But I think the other thing to think about too is, we got a little bit of this during introductions, is you guys are really from all over the country. Every archaeologist works a little differently. So even if you've worked on another site or another project, we all kind of have our own way to do it. And part of that is how we're trained. Part of that is the research questions we ask, but part of it is just sort of what the geology, the geography, the weather, the soils, the material culture, sort of the physical things and how they vary across the country and across the region. So some stuff may feel super familiar and some stuff may be things, even if you've done archaeology before, might be new to you. So, but really don't get overwhelmed. All of you, from reading your applications and your CVs, you're overachievers, so good job. But we also want you to come excited, not burn out before you even get here.
Cool. So does anybody have any questions about the syllabus? Terry, were you able to see that people have all registered and?
It looks like everybody's in and has reset their password. That was sort of how I was tracking whether or not you've saw my email. And then it also looks like everyone's in Slack now. So which is another way I was checking. So it looks like you all are in. If anything technologically, like you have questions about it, feel free to ask. If something's not working, if you're not able to access a document that I put a link to or whatever, ping me on Slack and I can get to it real quickly. We all kind of have Slack, at least I always have Slack open. I know Matt always has it open. So that's a real fast, easy way to get in touch with us and to communicate with us. Things get lost in email. It's just become a communication junk drawer at this point. So so feel free to filter questions through that if you need something immediate. And also use that channel to ask questions broadly. So you don't have to just ping me. If something's not working or you've got a question about a concept or whatever, ask it publicly, and then that helps us because we only have to answer the question once instead of getting 5 different people asking the same question about how this link doesn't work. Well, it means it doesn't work for everybody. So if you ask it once, then we can fix it once, and everybody knows that it's been fixed. So anyway, so that's another thing, just to
and so you'll know
part of that open communication bit.
The Slack the Slack board that Terry created, the workspace, Montpelier Field School, is specifically for the field school. So that's where, like, if you look at the channels on there, especially like the general one, but then there's day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. Those are for the various days, like we're in day 1 right now. So you can ask the question there, or you can ask it under general. And keeping it to everybody, like so everybody can see it, is great, because that way if you have a question and Terry's at lunch and I'm not eating my lunch, or it's 4 in the morning and Mary's up because Elizabeth's up, you'll get an answer right away. So keeping that in the overall would be great.
And also Alicia may ask a question and Olivia may know the answer to it.
That's the best. That's where.
So like, feel free to answer and have conversations amongst yourselves, right? Because we're all learning from everybody. So you all have experience and you've been reading things, and maybe you have experience with blacksmithing, so you might know some things about blacksmithing, right? So feel free to bring yourselves to this chat room too. The archaeology is a collaborative discipline. There's no such thing as an archaeologist who does this work independently of anybody else. So you all are bringing experiences and knowledge sets to the table. So feel free to use it, because we might learn something too.
So Slack is the water cooler of
exactly
the next week. It's where you can communicate and stay in touch with everybody. So it's your space to use. And we'll be using Slack to some extent for check-ins when you're here, but this week is the real time to use it. So that, like, for the staff, everybody under general checks in every day and says what worked great. I mean, if you're like, oh my God, I had to take the quiz 3 times before I passed it, say it. I mean, it's fine. So it's all good. So, or we might realize, oh my God, we put the wrong answers as the correct answers in the quiz, because we were building this all last week. So we were scrambling. If there's mistakes, don't be afraid to be like, oh, what is the garbage that's on this one? Because it might be that we missed it. There's like, how many pages on this, Terry? Yeah, a lot. So you all are the guinea pig. So thanks for having patience with us with this. So.
And we really do want feedback on it too, because, you know, we need to decide if even, you know, presumably the pandemic will end at some point, hopefully before the next field school. And we'd like to know if this is something that's useful and that we should keep, or if it's something we should, you know, throw on the trash heap or do a little differently. So
your first family function, like when you go
That's
to
right.
the family, if the potatoes are burned, you tell your brother they're burned. If it's somebody you don't know, you're like, oh, they're delicious. Tell us if the potatoes are burned. So, or if you get a stomach ache after eating the fish, because we have more fish in the fridge and we don't want to feed it to more people. I'm getting totally like,
it's almost like you've been talking for 2.5 straight hours.
I know, I need to like sign out and take a nap.
Well, why don't we take this opportunity to ask folks if they have any questions about any logistic things, or, you know, times, questions, assignments, anything for this week. We can also touch on some things if you have questions about your transition to coming here. I think these are good opportunities. Right now is a great opportunity. We'll have those 3 o'clock Eastern time check-ins every day, and one, if not of us, between Matt, Terry, and I, will be on all of those, if not more than one of us. And we can certainly answer those kinds of questions then, and touch base again probably on Friday. But just sort of logistics for this week. Does anybody have any questions or how things are working, any of that kind of stuff?
All of you all have it planned how you're getting to Montpelier, have that in the bag.
Has everybody, I have only seen a few, but if you haven't already emailed us to let us know your vaccination status, please do that. We've gotten some emails from people. This will really help us make the transition for you guys, your arrival, much more fun and more safe if we can plan appropriately. So if you can't remember if you emailed us, or if you haven't emailed us, just shoot us an email and let us know. We're not going to not let you come. You just, if you haven't been vaccinated, this is going to help us plan, and it's really going to help us not only in the field and in the lab kind of organize ourselves, but also for your time in Arlington House to kind of sort things out for you all there.
A simple example of how this helps is normally we put 2 people in an excavation unit. But I'm not going to put 2 people in an excavation unit who are unvaccinated, right? So that means we have to open more excavation units so we can spread you all out more. And I don't mind doing that. That's great. That's fine. It just an easy example of how it influences the decisions we make out here.
Whether or not you're vaccinated or not, if you still have concerns about social distancing, put that in the email as well, because we want to, like Terry's saying, want to know just what, and Mary's saying, what the parameters are for starting in the field. So
yeah.
Like if you're vaccinated and you're like, my sister-in-law caught COVID even though she was vaccinated and I don't want to be near anybody, say that. It says, my sister-in-law actually didn't catch COVID after she was vaccinated, but I don't mind being near people. So never mind. I'm getting punch drunk again. So.
Also, just some logistics. I really like logistics. This is what
they're important.
Just kind of for preparations for you guys are here thinking about things you need to bring. Matt mentioned sort of the long pants, stuff relating to ticks, of course, sunscreen, things like that, water, all of those kinds of things. But just to kind of remind you all, to get from Arlington House to the field site is quite a journey. So be prepared for that. So not only has everybody have their arrival sort of worked out, we want to make sure that everybody has their transportation once they are here worked out. So that means, you know, to be able to get to the grocery store that's 6 miles away, to get across the property from Arlington House to the site, which is, you can do it on a bike. You're just gonna have to have some time. But just really make sure that those things are lined up. And if they're not lined up, or if you have questions, or if you have problems, please let us know sooner rather than later, so we can figure out how to work with you. Because what we don't want to have happen is an Uber drops you off, and then you just think you're going to catch a ride with somebody the rest of the time. And maybe no one feels comfortable giving rides to somebody. So we just need to kind of get this worked out as quickly as possible. So if you have any concerns about transportation for arrival, for departure, for while you're here, let us know as soon as possible. For the course, as you all can see, we've got stuff really heavily for this week, but we also have things that are showing up throughout the rest of the week or the rest of the month while you're here. Some of those have to do with certain tours or activities that we're doing, and some of it has to do with like sort of additional readings or activities once you get here. So those things are we're still building those out kind of as we go through. So if you go to a page and there's not much there for week 4, like it'll be there. So don't worry too much about that. But if you have questions about any of that stuff further along, please let us know that too.
And as we add things, we'll post on Slack when we've got a new section done. So I'll let you know when the when next week's readings and stuff like that are up. I'll post it so you guys don't have to keep going back and check and check and check. We'll share with you. And when we've got the public project assignment and stuff like that, we need to get those things in, and we'll let you know when they're available for you.
Does anybody have any questions? Great.
I am curious if you all have had a chance to look through the content that's on there for day 1, because that's covering a lot of important stuff, right? There's obviously everything that Matt just, all the knowledge that Matt just dropped on you all today, but there's also, the project page about the research that we're actually doing, the project that you're going to be working on, stuff about research design, some of the introduction to some of the basic terms and ideas, what are features, what are artifacts, all of that sort of thing. What is blacksmithing, the history of blacksmithing at Montpelier, those kinds of things. Are there any questions or things that what's one thing that was new to you that you kind of didn't expect? See, I asked you a specific question, so now someone has to answer. You can't just say no. Emily, what's something new that you learned in the materials that you've looked at so far?
It's hard to narrow it down necessarily. I mean, I learned quite a lot. James Madison wasn't one that I've known a lot about. But I don't know, I guess just how much you guys have really excavated so far, and the metal detecting and the whole map and everything, like that was amazing.
You can do a lot in 3 decades.
Wow.
So Awesome, thank you. Thanks for sharing.
Out of curiosity question, we talked a lot about the objects that were being made there. Have you all found any of the actual tools that were used in the creation of the objects that they've been making or restoring?
Yes. So we have found some pieces of tongs that we've been that were used, possibly pieces of hammers that seem to have been used. We just had a regular visitor who's a local woman who is expert like horse trainer, also trained blacksmith, come by the site last week and bring a bunch of both her blacksmithing tools and different examples of horseshoes and horseshoe nails. And so now I've got them all photographed and are ready to start looking at the things with some new examples of things to compare to. But none of it's been cataloged yet, at least from the current excavation. So we haven't had the opportunity to go piece by piece and really nail down what all the things are.
That Hardy was very cool.
Yeah, the Hardy is super cool. So not expecting anyone to know what a Hardy is. It's this little pointy thing that sticks in a little hole in the anvil, and it allows you to cut off pieces of metal. So you've got a little, a big anvil, like Wile E. Coyote style, has a little hole in it, and you stick these little Hardys in it, and you can take the metal when it's red hot and break it off or clip it off or there. And the Hardy's the little tool that does it. So the one she brought was like a little triangle shape, and it lined up really well with some of the iron. You can see where you have those clipped marks or those cut marks. She also brought a
That's
pritchel.
all that we were talking about clipped iron. I was showing him the distribution map with all the clipped iron.
Yeah.
That does seem like where all the clip. You think about trying to do it with a cold chisel, that'd be a pain. But that Hardy, just like putting it on there and then beating the heck out of the metal, it's pretty cool.
She brought a pritchel, which is the thing that punches the holes in the horseshoes to put the nails through, which was very cool. And a lot of really cool things. So just like Terry was saying earlier about how we can learn from you, it is amazing sometimes when you get some of these folks in the public that know a whole lot about a very niche thing. Mm-hmm. And they can drop a bunch of knowledge on you and then come back the next week and give you examples and things to have in your study collection, which she also left us, which is pretty amazing.
If you all look at the Blacksmithing at Montpelier page on the course, there's a picture of the anvil, and there's a thing sticking up the anvil that's in the DuPont family blacksmith that we still have and that we'll make sure you see. There's a thing sticking up out of the anvil in the back, and that is the Hardy. So the Hardy from the blacksmith, the DuPont blacksmith, is still there in it. Anyway, if you're curious.
So one of you needs to dig one of those up for me. That would be cool.
Yes.
Can I ask a quick question?
That would be amazing. Yeah, go ahead, Rebecca.
Awesome. So we've been talking about, the Madison landscape. I was wondering if you, and I was watching one of your Instagram live feeds, Terry, a couple of weeks ago, and it was talking about how people were coming onto the plantation to go to get services from the blacksmith there that was located on the plantation. Do we know what kind of the landscape looks like outside of the Madison plantation? Like, are there smaller farms there? Or do you see do you think that there were a lot of people coming on to the property to get services and stuff like that? Like, what I'm trying to ask is, would this be kind of like a new iteration of like a monastic landscape almost, where it's being like the center of this area, the cultural center of this area?
Yeah, so I think that the 18th century landscape, when the, almost ironworks is in operation, that's, I think, and Matt can can undoubtedly jump in on this because he has a deeper knowledge of this. But that 18th century landscape, when the major blacksmithing operation is up near the main house, that is that's definitely the Madison Senior taking advantage of the fact that the Madisons were out in this area early, and that this area is starting to be populated and colonized by white European settlers, right? And so there is very much a periphery core type vibe going on, right? Where they're providing a service that doesn't exist out here yet. And so Montpelier very much is a production center for this region. Obviously, as the region grows, that becomes a little bit less necessary. Madison Jr. obviously doesn't continue on with it, whether that's because he doesn't have time to deal with it because he's got to go be president, right? Or for whatever reason. In this case, for the shop that we're working on right now, it does seem to be at some nexus of at least roads associated with this plant, to like interior to this plantation roads. There seem to be a couple roads that are headed towards it. The Madison plantation at this point is 5,000 plus acres, right? So there already is a big network of farms that are associated with the with Montpelier specifically. And this appears to be a center, agricultural industrial center for that larger plantation. Matt,
I just put in the chat the link to the blog that I did. It's a very short blog talking about, and I mentioned this in my lecture, of the Montpelier being one plantation among many, and then how it changes through time. And at the very bottom of the blog, there's a deed map explorer that you can look at, and looks just like what Terry is saying, through time, see how the plantation boundaries change. And you can see how, Montpelier is in the middle of a whole bunch of other plantations. So it's different through time, but there's probably all sorts that blacksmith is a crossroads of all different people on the plantation and off the plantation coming through.
And that's obviously really exciting, right? Because that means that this space is more than just the place where a blacksmith did blacksmithing, right? It becomes a social space. It becomes a political space, right? It's a space where people on different plantations and different parts of this plantation are meeting, are passing information, are engaging with each other, right? Are sharing gossip, are sharing information about, listen to what the guy who owns my plantation is doing and what he's doing over here and what's happening at Barbersville. And did you hear about so-and-so, right? Is all happening while your horse is getting reshod, right? So that's, it's very easy to think about spaces of labor only being about the work, right? But it's also about the humans who are engaging with each other while that work is happening. So it makes a place like the blacksmith shop have multiple layers of meaning, and those layers of meaning are really, really important when you're also talking about a group of people that are enslaved, right? And so building political networks and passing information, this is more than just passing information amongst friends. This is, information transfer, right, is a big deal. That's important. That's how networks and communities support each other. And when you're talking, or how they resist, right, or the oppression that they're facing, and navigate those networks. So spaces like this start to take on additional layers of meaning beyond their function, right? The Madison function of this is it's where blacksmithing happens, right? But the function of this space to enslaved African-American community has multiple layers and a lot of different meanings to it. What else? What other things did you all learn so far?
I was looking through the textbook, and about a third of the way through, there was this amazing picture of the slave burial ground, and you could see where it was because the snow had settled in the sunken graves. And so I was thinking about that, and I was wondering if you have used LiDAR to do any sort of grave detection there.
We'll definitely talk about that when we do the tour of the cemetery. But the LiDAR has mostly been for agricultural features because the graves are like about at longest are 6 feet, and you need to have a longer linear feature to pick up. You can see them, but they're not as useful as other techniques.
But we've used ground penetrating radar.
Yeah, we use ground penetrating radar to locate the subsurface disturbances in the cemetery and grave shafts.
That's a great question, Nathaniel. There'll be a whole tour on the cemeteries at Montpelier that Matt will take you on in a couple weeks. Yeah, that's great. And that is the coolest photo. Also, I love that picture.
Yeah, I actually had one other question about that. I was wondering, were slave burial, like in the cemetery, was it mainly just slaves that were on that plantation, or was it a spot for people of different plantations, or was it pretty much, one cemetery per property?
We can assume it would be one cemetery per property, but we don't know. And that's something we don't even know in the Madison Family Cemetery. There are likely enslaved individuals buried in the Madison Family Cemetery. There's so much. That's a great thing about archaeology, or could be a terrible thing. If you assume things going into a site, you better just assume they're wrong, not that they're right, because assumptions need to be tested. And that's gets into the whole point of doing the excavation and all the analysis that we do. So hypothesis testing. You're asking questions to form hypotheses. So
yep. Which is in the research design section, which is part of this week, part of this day. So awesome.
Sure, Nathaniel get it. So
what else has stood out to you this week, or this week? Well, yeah, this week, I guess. Day one.
For me, it was all the stuff with James Madison Sr. and the ironworks and that whole area by the temple. That part was new to me, and I had no idea about that stuff.
Yeah, that's it's a neat site. And it's also, in addition to the stuff we were just talking about, the other thing that's really important about that site is it's another way that the Madison family was building wealth. So in addition, Madison Sr., in addition to the ironworks, he's got an agricultural plantation that he's inherited. He has property that he's inherited, and he has enslaved people who he's inherited, right? So there's many different lines of avenues of profit and wealth building that the Madisons are engaged in. And need to remember that enslaved people, you can borrow money against them. So you can, it's a way to build wealth. So when he builds this giant house in the 1760s, it's a major statement. It's the biggest brick building in the county when it's built. So so there's a lot of wealth that's built, and he's able to funnel a lot of that money right into the education of his young son and the rest of his family. So I mean, tutors, private boarding school, Princeton. So investment in his family that Moses, the blacksmith, enslaved blacksmith, doesn't get to invest any, that kind of wealth into his kids, right? Go ahead, Alicia.
Something that I found really interesting was the way that the different nails, like the different nail structures, can be used to date.
You can get a lot of nails. And one of the things I also want to just kind of give you guys a heads up with the artifacts in particular is you will have opportunities to handle, touch, see all of these before you're forced to identify any of them. So we're going to do some handling, some cleaning, some getting familiar with them in 3 dimensions, because so much of learning that kind of stuff, you have to feel it in your hand rather than just see a picture of it. But yeah, nails are Matt's favorite artifact, and we are finding a whole lot of them for him this season.
Yeah, we talked about Montpelier gold in the lecture, so.
Yes, if nails are something you like, you're in the right discipline. So,
I just have a kind of a quick question because I don't know this. Who here has been to Montpelier before? So just Carissa? Wow. How many of you, because we've got folks from far away, who's been to Virginia before? Who's been to Central Virginia before? All right, okay. So I think that one of the things that's going to be really interesting with such a kind of geographically diverse group is that I think part of getting to understand Montpelier, and this kind of the questions Rebecca was asking and some of the ones Nathaniel were asking, really are trying to, I think it felt like trying to place Montpelier in this broader location. So how does Montpelier fit not just onto the landscape of itself, but how does it fit into the landscape of this region, of the state, of this part of the country, and then of the country? And I think that's going to be a really interesting experience for you all. Most of you having never stepped foot on the property before, but being from really different places, being from like outside of Boston, being from California, being from Ohio, from these really different places, I think it's going to be really interesting when you all arrive, kind of, and can walk the landscape and smell the air and look around and kind of get this the feeling for it in space, both very physically but also culturally. So thinking about all of these things that we're talking about and how they fit into not only what Montpelier was in the past, but what it is today, and how we understand it today, I think are really interesting things to kind of think about. These burial practices, what is the norm for this area? Or how does this blacksmith shop fit into a larger community? Just like, how does this place connect to a bigger picture in the past and in the present? I think it's going to be a really interesting thing to see through your all's eyes. And that's something I'm really excited about, particularly with this group having such a wide variety of locations and experiences coming here.
and even within Virginia, right, it's a little bit different than what people typically go see when they're in Virginia, which is going to be Williamsburg and Jamestown, right, which is a 17th century site and a 18th century urban context, and also both in the Tidewater, right? And we're up in the Piedmont, where there's clay and not sand, which you will discover. But also that's a little bit later down from the colonization perspective, is a little bit later down the time frame, right? So again, the idea that the Madisons are early out here in the 1720s, 1730s, means that and that's a very much a rural landscape everywhere. It's just a slightly different twist on 18th and 19th century Virginia than what's happening down in, sort of the main spots where people visit when they visit Virginia and think about Virginia history. All right, what else? Anything else that stood out to you all? All right. Well, thanks for playing along. I appreciate it. We're gonna log on every day at 3 o'clock. We're gonna have something to talk about. So I would strongly, if you haven't finished the stuff for day one, I would encourage you to get through it. And if you are feeling, particularly for those of you on the West Coast, pushing into, I don't know what the best way to kind of navigate this is, but I would say, like, get as much done as you can get done early on and try and stay ahead of the game, so that when we have these meetings every day, you've had a chance to review the content for that day, if that makes sense. So I know things are, for some of you it's lunchtime. So anyway, but tomorrow, day 2 is going to be focused on finding archaeological sites and excavating archaeological sites. So, so we're gonna, and the research project that we are working on is really focused on identifying archaeological sites, looking at a blank space, right? Just a field of grass, and trying to find archaeological sites on it. That is what we are trying to do with the home farm project. And so what this and what you all are going to be helping us do over the next month is exactly that process. We've done some of it already. We've done some metal, we're at different stages on different areas. So you really want to understand methodologically what it is we're doing, how we're using metal detecting, GPR, shovel test pits, and excavation units to identify archaeological sites. This is supposed to give you the background on all of that. And then you are also going to be doing archaeological excavation in excavation units. So the actual process of excavating units, this is the process that when you get here on Monday, I'm going to walk you around for an hour, and then we're going to put shovels and trowels in your hands. So, so having reviewed the field guide, and getting an starting to build an understanding of what we record, why we record it, stuff like that, is really, really important. So that's what tomorrow is going to be all about. So come ready to ask questions and stuff like that. Again, and I think Mary was saying this when I got in, like, we don't expect you to know everything by 3 o'clock tomorrow. That's what field school exists, so that you will know everything by the end of field school, right? But this is giving you that the getting you familiar with the resources you have available and with the concepts, so that when we are actually playing them out in the real world at the archaeology site, it's not completely foreign to you. The other thing that I would just want to quick mention about the field guide is that is the field guide that was designed and written for the pre-digital paperwork days. So we haven't had a chance to fully update it. So there may be some things that are going to be a little bit different. There's scans of archaeology forms in the appendix of that guide. Hopefully you will not see them over the next month. If you do, it's because all of the iPads died, and then I'll be devastated, and you won't see me either. So so at any rate, some of it's going to be a little different, but the information we collect is all the same, right? So we didn't stop collecting information about inclusions or soil type or any of that. The information is all the same, just how we're collecting it is a little bit different. And that'll be stuff that'll be a lot easier for you to, you can watch the lunch and learn, but that'll be easiest learned by doing. So anyway, so that's what's on deck. Any questions? Good. Awesome.
I just want to say one quick thing before you guys go. If you've read everything and learned everything and you want more content, happy June 1st. We are celebrating Juneteenth all month long at Montpelier. And we have virtual programs scheduled every week for the month of June. They are all free. And the first one is tomorrow night at 7 p.m. And this is in partnership with the National Archives, as well as the Orange County African American Historical Society. We are presenting a book talk with Annette Gordon-Reed on her new book on Juneteenth. And then I am actually going to be on a panel with her and with one of the board members from the Orange County African American Historical Society, talking about sort of the spread of Juneteenth across the country. I'm really excited about this. I'm super invested in all of this. But please, if you have a chance, check out some of our Juneteenth website and the stuff we have going on for that. It is not something you're going to have a quiz on or be graded on, but I think it's one of the coolest things that we do. So, and you guys are also going to be helping on Juneteenth on the day of actually on the grounds at Montpelier. So it would be fun to have some background in it before then. So that's my plug.
All right, y'all. Well, Matt, do you have anything?
No, what I'll do is I'll send everybody the link to the recording. So for Nathaniel and Carissa, if you want to catch up on that, and you can, or if anybody wants to listen to parts of it again, that'd be great. But give me like an hour on that because I have to load it to YouTube. And it looks like Mary put in the Juneteenth link because all the links. I'll put the links in as well from the notes so that you all have those in case you missed them. So
cool, Matt. And why don't you throw that in the day one channel on?
Yeah.
On the
thank you, Terry.
Slack.
I will put the link to the YouTube upload and then all these notes into the day one, just like Terry said. So that way you can start using Slack. That's awesome. So,
all right.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Good evening.
Day one in the books. Good work.
Woohoo.